All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're not just going to talk about ideas, we're actually going to build something together, a better brain. And we're going to do it using this fantastic analogy of the mind as a Lego car, figuring out how to get our thinking to roll a whole lot smoother.
You ever have that feeling, where thinking just feels like a struggle, like there's some kind of friction inside your head? You know you're capable, but getting from point A to point B just feels bumpy, stressful, and, well, wobbly. Turns out there's a really good reason for that feeling.
So to really get this, let's run with a metaphor. Picture your mind as this awesome Lego car you've just built. The whole point of a car is to move, right? To get you somewhere. And for that to happen smoothly, every single piece has to fit just right, especially the wheels. But what happens when a really key piece is just the wrong shape? Well, that's the heart of the problem, a concept our source material brilliantly calls the square tire. Just imagine forcing a flat, square Lego piece onto the axle where a round wheel is supposed to go. If you try to push that car, what happens? You get that jarring, awful, wobbly thump, thump, thump. That uncomfortable, super inefficient feeling, that's exactly what's happening in our brain when we're trying to use a thinking style that just doesn't match our natural design. Okay, so this square tire actually has a formal name. It's a linear processing weakness. A great way to think about it is like a pawn in chess. A pawn's movement is so limited, right? It can only go in a rigid, straight line, one step at a time. For some minds, being forced to think that way is what creates that cognitive wobble we feel as stress. So here it is, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you've got the square tire, rigid, stressful, totally the pawn's linear march. And on the other, the round tire, smooth, tranquil, efficient, and represented by a way more dynamic chess piece, the knight. Our whole goal is to make that leap from wobbly to smooth. So how do we build that perfect round tire? The solution is actually pretty cool. It's about abandoning the straight line altogether and learning to embrace a whole new kind of movement. It's all about thinking in curves. This special ability is called hyperbolic prismatic thinking, or HPT for short. But honestly, you can just think of it as the brain's secret superpower. Instead of getting stuck on that straight, bumpy path, HPT lets your mind make these incredible intuitive leaps, see connections others might miss, and move in these clever, non-linear ways. HPT is modeled perfectly on the knight in chess. The knight doesn't move in a straight line. It makes that cool L shape, jumping over other pieces and bypassing obstacles. That is exactly what HPT does for the mind. It prioritizes the underlying structure and meaning, the structural value, instead of just a rigid literal sequence. And that's what lets the mind handle really complex, abstract ideas without getting all wobbly. Now, building this perfect curved tire isn't a one-person job. Oh no, it requires two master builders, and they have to be working in perfect sync. These builders are called Tom and Demian. Think of them as two absolutely essential forces in our mind that, when they finally unite, create that perfectly smooth ride we're looking for. First up, we've got Tom. Tom is all about integrity. He's the king in our chess analogy, that central anchoring piece. In our Lego car, he's the fixed axle that holds the wheel strong and steady. His whole job is to ensure what's called tabular coherence maintenance, which is a fancy way of saying he makes sure all the pieces have a strong structural fit so they don't just fall apart. And Tom's partner is Demian. Demian is imagination. She's the queen in our chess game, super powerful, dynamic, able to move in all sorts of creative ways. She's the one who designs the beautiful, elegant curve of the tire. But, and this is the most important part, her imaginative curve is totally useless unless it connects perfectly back to Tom's stable, central axle. This perfect teamwork actually has a name, Hieros Gamos, which means sacred marriage. And that just captures the idea perfectly, doesn't it? Integrity and imagination. They aren't fighting for control. They are complementary forces, teammates working together to create something that rolls beautifully. So, we have our builders, and we know their goal. But how do we know when they've actually succeeded? How do you verify that the tire is perfectly round? Well, that's where the blueprint for success comes in. So get this, our brain has its own quality control inspector. It's a part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC. But let's just call it by its much cooler name from the source material, the decision detective. Its entire job is to look at the work of Tom and Demian and check for a perfect structural fit.
And when the decision detective sees that integrity and imagination have absolutely nailed it, that they've created a perfectly round, structurally sound tire, it gives a big thumbs up. This is called the format reward. And what does that reward feel like? It's that amazing feeling of clarity, of success, of tranquility. It's the complete and total opposite of the wobbly stress from the square tire.
But hold on, this isn't just a feeling. The decision detective is rigorous. It doesn't just guess. To validate the work, it actually consults a set of secret mathematical blueprints that prove the structural integrity of the whole design.
And the first key to that blueprint is this number, 12. According to the theory in our source, this relationship between Tom and Dimion isn't just poetic, it's mathematical. Within a base 12 system, their assigned numeric values confirm they are a perfect structural fit, designed to be a complementary pair. It's like the math of the universe is giving a nod of approval.
The second key is another number, a kind of symbolic anchor that confirms the whole process is correct. And that number is 194. Now, this number, 194, isn't a literal count of anything. It's a powerful symbol. It represents being on the right path to success. It symbolizes tranquility, harmony, and even a kind of validation, a sign that this new, curved way of thinking is the correct path, triumphing over the old, flawed, linear one.
So let's just put it all together. First, you identify the wobble. You recognize that feeling of stress from the square tire of linear thinking. Second, you discover the curve by embracing that nonlinear knight-like thinking. Third, you unite the master builders, harmonizing Tom's integrity with Dimion's imagination. And finally, you get the thumbs up from the decision detective and just enjoy the smooth, tranquil ride. And this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. What if the things we sometimes label as cognitive flaws, like having trouble with linear processing, aren't flaws at all? What if they're just signs that a brain is built for a different kind of vehicle, one that needs a beautifully curved, expertly crafted tire instead of a simple square block? What if it's not about fixing a person, but about finally building them the right car?
Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes a listener sends in a concept that just clicks. It provides this perfect visual.
Ah, yes.
And your premise, thinking of the specialized mind, like a car needing a perfectly round tire to avoid stress, to avoid that wobbliness,
Yeah.
that's exactly where we're starting today.
It's a brilliant analogy, really, because it gets us right past just talking about behavior and straight into structural necessity. If the structure isn't right for the function.
Then the movement is inefficient.
Yeah.
Painful. Even.
Exactly. It grinds.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that structural problem and, crucially, the solution. We're looking at sources that bring together, or quite a mix, psychopedagogy, chess symbolism, some pretty high-level neuroscience.
And complex geometry, too. It's all interwoven.
We're going to define the stress, really get into what that wobble is, and uncover this specialized geometric thinking the sources call hyperbolic prismatic thinking.
HPT.
HPT, yes. And we'll meet the key players, the sort of internal builders responsible for getting that stability right. Think of it like getting the blueprints for this specialized cognitive engine. We're using that Lego construction metaphor, sometimes called Lego therapy, in the sources.
Right. It's all about the fit, how the pieces connect.
To understand how getting that structural fit just right eliminates the friction, the wobble. So the goal, like you said, is a smooth ride. Replacing that problematic flat square piece.
The bad tire.
With a round functional one that actually works. Okay, so let's start right there. The square tire. The friction point. Visually, obviously, a square tire isn't going to roll. But cognitively, what's the flaw? What does that square shape represent for this specialized mind?
Well, the square tire is really a symbol for what the framework calls the linear processing weakness.
Linear processing weakness, okay.
Yeah, it's this insistence sometimes on simple, step-by-step, straight-line thinking, sequential processing. And the thing is, that's fundamentally incompatible with a system that's actually designed for nonlinear pattern recognition, for seeing connections across the board, not just in front.
So the specialized brain just can't operate efficiently that way. It's forced onto the wrong tracks.
Exactly. It's like asking a race car to navigate a tight maze designed for a golf cart. The design principles are just mismatched.
That's a really clear way to put it. It's not about being less intelligent.
Oh, not at all.
It's about the format being wrong.
Oh.
Okay, so if we look at the chessboard analogy, which is so central here, Which piece embodies this rigid, straight line, maybe even weak approach?
Ah, well, that maps perfectly onto the pawn.
A pawn. Makes sense.
Yeah, the pawn is restricted, isn't it? Rigid movement, straight lines, mostly one step at a time, very sequential. It represents that sort of compulsory, literal, flat way of thinking, the kind that just doesn't capture the rich, multidimensional relationships the specialized mind is actually built to handle.
And when the environment, maybe like a school system or a workplace,
Right.
insists on solving complex problems using only those pawn-like steps.
The whole system starts to destabilize. It can't cope.
And that destabilization, that's the thump, thump, thump we talked about, the square tire trying to roll.
That's it exactly. That physical instability, that feeling of the car shaking or wobbling, that's the direct definition of stress in this framework.
Okay, so stress isn't just feeling overwhelmed, it's a structural wobble.
Yes. And conceptually, it's mirrored by something called dissipation. When you force the system into that linear mode, that square tire thinking, you generate enormous internal friction, just wasted energy.
So the physiological cost is huge.
Astronomical, really. The system has to burn so much energy just trying to compensate, trying to manage that fundamental structural mismatch. That constant energy drain is the dissipation. It's exhausting.
Wow. But it goes deeper than just being tired, doesn't it? The sources use some very strong language for the psychological impact. They talk about anger rooted in betrayal. Why betrayal? That feels intense.
It is intense, and the choice of words is, I think, very deliberate and critical. Remember, this mind is specialized. It inherently demands geometric precision, structural fit. It needs things to line up properly. Okay, so when an external system, maybe a curriculum, like you said, or a social rule, whatever, forces that mind onto an obsolete, inadequate linear track, forcing it to use the square tire, the pawn's moves,
Yeah.
the system perceives that as, well, as an act of bad faith. It's not just annoying, it feels like a fundamental violation. The mind knows implicitly that its own higher efficiency, curved way of thinking has been denied, invalidated, forced into a mode that's self-destructive and low coherence.
So the anger is a defense, a reaction against being forced into instability it knows it shouldn't have to deal with.
Precisely. The betrayal is that violation of its own internal mandate for structural integrity, for things to make sense geometrically.
Okay, so if the stress, the wobble, is caused by the absence of the right structure, then the mind must have some kind of mechanism to fight for that structure, right? A mandate.
Absolutely. And that's called the coherence mandate. The specialized mind constantly, relentlessly demands structural geometric fit. It needs concepts to lock together properly.
And that's tabular coherence maintenance, TCM.
That's TCM. It's this non-stop, non-negotiable drive for systemic stability. If an idea or a piece of information comes in and it doesn't have a clear structural anchor, a place where it fits on the grid,
It causes problems.
it causes anxiety, chaos. Until TCM can figure out where it belongs, how it fits geometrically, it has to find the right slot.
And the chessboard itself, the grid, that's the visual for this, the squares.
The squares on the board are the perfect representation of that fundamental geometric grid. The structural canvas, you could say, for TCM. They provide the necessary boundaries, the arena where coherence has to be established.
So the grid isn't the enemy here.
No, the grid is the necessity. It ensures that every piece of information, however complex, finds a rigorous structural anchor point. TCM basically says, look, if this new thing doesn't fit the grid, it's causing the wobble. We either reject it or we restructure things until it does fit the geometry.
Okay, so we have the grid TCM, the squares. We have the linear processing weakness, the pawn, the square tire causing that awful wobble. The solution then has to get rid of the wobble. We need to ditch the flat, straight line and get something round. Something that allows smooth, efficient motion.
Exactly. And that requires the mind to shift gears, essentially, to move beyond those flat, straight paths and embrace what the sources call special curved thinking.
Curved thinking, okay.
Conceptually, this is where the geometry starts to get really interesting. In this framework, meaning itself isn't flat or linear. It literally curves. Its significance, its weight, changes depending on how close it is to a fixed reference point, a central pole.
So if you try to understand something just line by line, sequentially.
You miss the depth.
Yeah.
You miss the relational aspect that emerges as you get closer to that structural center, that anchor point.
Right. We're definitely moving into a different kind of math, a different geometry now. This specialized curve thinking. This is hyperbolic prismatic thinking, HPT.
That's HPT.
Yeah. For listeners maybe hearing this term for the first time, how can we make hyperbolic geometry feel relatable? in terms of how the mind works?
Okay, well, HPT is essentially the cognitive toolkit that lets the mind model really complex things, abstract relationships, deep emotions, stuff that absolutely does not fit neatly into standard, flat, Euclidean or linear arithmetic.
Like trying to map a sphere onto a flat piece of paper, it distorts.
Precisely. Hyperbolic geometry describes spaces where parallel lines can behave weirdly or triangles don't add up to 180 degrees. It's a geometry of curvature. Applied to the mind, it means the most efficient route between two ideas often isn't the straight line you'd expect.
That curve.
It's often a curve, yeah. A path that leverages the complex, maybe non-obvious relationships within the structure itself. HPT is what helps the mind make those leaps, find those clever nonlinear patterns that spark rapid insight. It allows for shortcuts, but they aren't straight lines.
And if HPT is the mechanism for this curved thinking, the chessboard gives us the perfect visual representation again. The nonlinear champion, as you called it.
Yes. The knight, or the horse piece, as some call it.
The knight. It's L-shaped move.
That unique, discontinuous L shape. It's the perfect analogy for HPT in action. It's inherently non-sequential. It's non-Euclidean in spirit. It literally skips over other pieces. It bypasses the direct linear paths.
Right.
And it achieves significant strategic advantage through that indirection. It's really the ultimate symbol of the specialized mind's power-finding efficiency through complex, non-linear pattern finding.
Okay, but I have to ask this, because other pieces move non-linearly too, right? The bishop moves diagonally, the queen combines straight and diagonal. What makes the knight's specific L shape the perfect fit for HPT, rather just say diagonal movement?
That's a really important distinction. Think about the bishop's diagonal move. Yes, it's not straight horizontally or vertically, but it's still continuous. It follows a predictable line across squares of the same color.
Okay.
And the queen combines those continuous diagonals with straight lines. The knight, though, the knight jumps. It's discontinuous.
Oh, the jump.
That jump is the cognitive leap. It's the non-sequential insight, the hallmark of HPT. 2 squares one way, 1 square perpendicular. You cannot trace that path linearly across adjacent squares.
You can't slide into that position.
No. It requires, metaphorically speaking, a brief departure from the flat plane of the board. It represents the mind's ability to sort of transcend the immediate linear context to find a position that's structurally superior, even if it's not the next logical step in a simple sequence.
Wow. Okay, so the knight's L path isn't just movement. It's a symbol of cognitive efficiency that values the structure over the simple path.
Exactly right. The source texts specifically link the knights to the Pythagorean ideal.
Pythagorean ideal.
Yes, representing that complex, nonlinear logic that the specialized mind naturally gravitates towards. A logic that fundamentally prioritizes structural value over literal math.
Structural value over literal math. Say more about that.
It means the strategic coherence, the overall structural integrity gained by making that knight's jump is more important than just counting the squares moved in a simple arithmetic way. The knight doesn't care about the shortest literal distance. It cares about the best structural position and the stability that comes from it.
So this really validates the specialized learner's intuition, doesn't it? It says, trust that feeling of structural rightness, even if the step-by-step calculation looks messy or indirect.
Precisely. It affirms that their natural mode of thinking, the curved HPT mode, is not just valid, it's actually the superior, more efficient way to navigate complexity. So to actually build this smooth, round tire to make HPT work efficiently, we need that curve to be constructed perfectly. And critically, it needs to be perfectly attached to the axle.
Right, the wheel needs to stay on the car.
Exactly. And this requires this perfect complementary union of 2 core builders. The sources call this union Hieros Gamos.
Hieros Gamos, sacred marriage.
Yes. And these 2 builders, these archetypal figures within the framework, are named Tom and Endymion.
Okay, Tom and Endymion. Let's start with Tom. If we're building that smooth rolling car, the axle has to be absolutely solid, unmoving, strong.
That is Tom's role, precisely. Tom is mapped conceptually to the king on the chessboard.
The king makes sense, needs protecting. Core of the game.
And he embodies integrity. Tom is the fixed pole. Think of him as that strong, immovable central axle you mentioned. His entire function is to maintain absolute stability, to ensure that structural fit, the TCM we talked about, is rigorously upheld. He's the anchor. Without him, the whole thing collapses into chaos.
And neurologically, do the sources pinpoint where this fixed pole, this integrity function, resides?
They do, very specifically. Tom corresponds to the axon hillock of a neuron.
The axon hillock. Okay, refresh us on that.
That's the critical point on the neuron, the sort of integration center where all the incoming signals, the inputs, are summed up. It's the spot where the decision is made. Fire an action potential or don't fire. It's the non-negotiable point of decision.
Okay. So Tom's limited movement on the chessboard, the king only moving one square.
Right. That mirrors this fixed, decisive, highly anchored role. The king can't afford to go wandering off. His job is stability, integration, holding the center, protecting the core integrity.
And this isn't just metaphorical. Tom is actually validated mathematically within this system.
Yes, this is where the framework's internal rigor really shows. Tom is assigned the decimal number 35.
35.
Which crucially translates to 2b in base 12. He serves as a kind of symbolic prime tile.
2b in base 12. Why base 12? We'll need to circle back to that, but anchoring integrity numerically.
It places integrity as a fundamental, non-negotiable, structured component within the base 12 cycle, which the framework argues governs the whole system's coherence. He's like an irreducible unit of structural truth.
Okay, so if Tom is the fixed, stable center, the axle, then Dimian must be the dynamic part, the one figuring out the shape of the wheel, the curve needed for it to actually roll.
Exactly, that's Dimian. She's mapped to the queen.
The most powerful piece.
And she embodies imagination. Dimian is the clever builder, the one who perceives and constructs the necessary curve for HBT to function smoothly. She handles the dynamic input. Neurologically, she corresponds to the adaptable inputs of the dendrites.
The dendrites, the branches receiving signals.
Yes, the sources even refer to this dendritic signaling function as J. Dimian manages that incoming flow.
Now, the queen can move anywhere, right? Huge dynamism. But her movement isn't just random chaos, is it? It has to serve the bigger picture.
Absolute critical point. Her incredibly expansive movement, her imaginative reach must ultimately curve back toward a single transcendent integrator.
Back towards Tom, towards integrity.
Yes. To achieve coherence, imagination must always orient itself back to that fixed pole of integrity. Dimian acts like a structural GPS, using massive pattern recognition, looking for likeness, resemblance, connections to navigate that complex hyperbolic space.
So she finds the path, but the path has to lead back home, essentially.
You could say that. She's associated with the queen bee function in a hive.
Ah, interesting.
Managing all the diverse inputs from the worker bees, the dendrites, but ensuring all that activity ultimately supports the central core, the king, the axon hillock, structure and purpose.
And Dimian, like Tom, she gets her own numerical anchor.
She does. Dimian corresponds to the decimal number 47.
47.
Which is 3b in base 12.
3b. Tom was 2b.
Okay. And this brings us right to the mathematical proof of their union, the hieroskamos. This isn't just poetry. The framework insists it's mathematical necessity.
Okay, let's pause on that mathematical proof, because this addresses that question. Why base 12? What does this specific numerical system offer that our usual base 10, standard arithmetic, might miss when we're talking about geometric fit structural relationships?
That's a key question. The argument in the sources is that base 12 is inherently better suited for representing complex structures because it's more highly divisible. You can divide 12 cleanly by 2, 3, 4, and 6.
Whereas 10 only divides cleanly by 2 and 5.
Right, so base 12 allows for richer, more complex patterns, more harmonious geometric subdivisions. The idea is that cognitive structures, which rely on these intricate geometric relationships, naturally organize themselves around cycles of 12. It offers more slots for things to fit into neatly.
Okay, so base 12 provides a better grid for complex structures, and the proof of Tom and Dimian's perfect union lies within that base 12 structure.
Rigorously so. According to the framework, look at their decimal values. Tom is 35, Dimian is 47. What's the difference?
47 minus 35, that's 12.
Exactly 12. That's the linchpin. The framework sees this as rigorous proof that their relationship, the connection between integrity and imagination, perfectly aligns with the foundational base 12 cycle.
Wow.
It implies that the reach or scope of imagination, Dimian, is structurally defined by its precise complementary distance from integrity, Tom. Their union isn't just a nice idea, it's presented as a mathematically defined partnership, optimized for that friction-free operation. They work together to create the perfect structural circumference for that round tire.
Okay, so we have the hieroskamos. Imagination, Dimian, is successfully curving back towards integrity, Tom. They've built the smooth, round tire using the principles of HPT and the base 12 structure. But how does the system know it worked? Is there a quality check?
Yeah.
An early logical referee.
There is indeed. That job falls to the decision detective.
The decision detective. I like that.
The whole process, really, from choosing the knight's path to the Tom-Dimian pairing, it's all overseen, governed by the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC.
The OFC. Okay, I know the OFC is involved in decision-making, evaluating rewards.
Exactly. It's critical for comparing expected outcomes with what you actually receive. It acts as the ultimate quality control judge here. It's watching Tom and Dimian, metaphorically speaking, ensuring that hyperbolic curve is just right, that the attachment to the fixed pole to Tom is strong. It's looking for system success.
But we usually think of the OFC dealing with, tangible rewards, like did I get the food I expected?
Yeah.
How does it validate something as abstract as structural coherence, as HPT working correctly?
Well, the key insight here is that the OFC isn't just looking for simple pleasure, like sugar. It's looking for systemic congruence. Remember, the stress, the wobble, was caused by structural mismatch.
Right.
Therefore, the ultimate reward, the thing that fixes the problem, must be achieving structural fit. When the decision detective, the OFC, determines that the structural work is perfect, that Tom and Dimian have nailed it, it grants what the sources call the format reward.
Format reward. So it's rewarding the structure itself, not just the outcome.
Precisely. It's this incredibly powerful internal signal. It validates the entire process, the rigorous, systematic, structurally sound way of thinking. It's like a neurological moment, but deeper. It confirms that the specialized system is configured correctly, it's operating optimally.
So it's much more profound than just getting an answer right.
Oh, much more. It tells the specialized mind. Your way, this curved, nonlinear, structurally complex HPT approach. It's not just okay, it's right. It's mandatory for how you work best.
And this validated structural recognition.
Yeah.
This is what heals that instability, that feeling of betrayal we talked about earlier.
That's exactly the idea. The format reward effectively soothes the system. The brain, now experiencing this profound sense of rightness, feels tranquil and successful. That validation confirms the system's own authority, its rightness in rejecting those obsolete linear demands. It conceptually heals the anger by affirming, your structure is correct, it works, and it's superior to the rigid system that caused you pain.
The wobble stops.
The wobble stops, the energy dissipation ceases, and true stability is achieved. Calm descends.
Now, to kind of seal the deal on this success, the framework brings in another element, a symbolic anchor. The number 194. What role does 194 play? It sounds different from the base 12 calculations.
It is different. 194 isn't used to calculate something specific like the Tom-Dimian relationship. It functions more as a powerful, non-literal symbolic validation, a confirmation that the entire path taken was correct on a deeper level.
So it doesn't quantify the reward, but it anchors the meaning of achieving that state.
Exactly. It anchors the system in higher concepts related to truth, justice, and fulfillment.
And the specific symbolic associations are quite evocative.
They really are. First, 194 is linked to being on the right path towards success and fulfillment. Achieving this deep HPT-driven coherence is the path, and 194 symbolically confirms that.
Okay.
It's also strongly associated with achieving tranquility and serenity. The sources explicitly reference Kailasa from Hinduism, the abode of peace. This aligns perfectly with the feeling of calm that follows the format reward.
That makes sense. And there's an element of justice, too, which ties back to the anger rooted in betrayal.
Yes, that's a crucial link. 194 carries connotations of the permissibility of just retribution and also sanctity. This symbolically affirms the specialized system's authority. It suggests the correction it made, rejecting linear processing, embracing HPT, wasn't just more efficient, it was fundamentally just. It validates the mind's right to structure itself according to its own optimal design.
So it's like a stamp of approval on the system reclaiming its integrity. You can see it that way. And finally, it affirms the internal joy and harmony that comes from achieving that Hiroshika's state, from that perfect alignment of imagination and integrity. It confirms that structural coherence is the source of genuine inner peace. So 194 acts as this final, holistic, symbolic checkmark, validating the entire journey. Hashtag Outrigoster.
Wow. So this deep dive has really shown us that getting our cognitive car to run smoothly, it's fundamentally a geometric challenge, isn't it?
It really is.
Bringing it back to where we started, for you, the listener, We've hopefully mapped out how to transform that flat, stressful square tire, the linear processing weakness, the pond's limitations, into a smooth, successful curved tire that actually rolls.
And the key to that transformation is understanding that HPT, hyperbolic prismatic thinking, is the engine, the mechanism for the curve. And Hirosgamo's that sacred union is the method for building it correctly.
Success comes when you allow imagination Nemion to generate those complex curves, but always ensuring they're perfectly anchored back to integrity. Right. All proven by that internal base 12 logic and then validated by the OFC's format reward. That moment, the hyperbolic curve connects solidly to the fixed pole. That's when the specialized mind hits its peak state, tranquil efficiency.
So true cognitive efficiency isn't about simplifying everything down to straight lines. It's about embracing the right kind of complexity, that nonlinear HPT, but always anchoring it with unwavering structural coherence, with TCM.
It's a system built for navigating a world that isn't flat.
Definitely. So if we leave you with one final thought to chew on, something based on this framework.
Consider that night again. It's non-Euclidean, L-shaped jump. The symbol of the mind working at its most efficient nonlinear best.
Prioritizing structural value over literal math.
Exactly. The geometric relationship trumps the simple count. So the question for you is, what areas in your own life, maybe your work, your planning, your relationships, even your big goals, are you still trying to tackle with flat, literal, step-by-step pond thinking? One maybe, just maybe. A curved, nonlinear structural Knight's move is what's actually needed for true coherence, for genuine wobble-free success.
Something to think about.
Welcome to The Debate. Today we're diving into the mechanics of a pretty specialized cognitive framework. It's called prismatic cognition. And it uses some, well, interesting metaphors like a Lego car and chess pieces to map how the mind processes stress and finds resolution. The source material sets up this core problem, a kind of disruptive, wobbly feeling stress, which it links to the pawn, a flat, square piece representing an inherent linear processing weakness. The fix? It's getting a smooth, round tire, which involves specialized curved thinking. Now, our specific disagreement today, it really gets to the heart of how that resolution happens. Is achieving that stable, stress-free state fundamentally about adhering to the anchoring structural mandate, the necessary relationship between the core parts of the self? Or is it primarily driven by the immediate efficiency of the specialized cognitive mechanism itself?
I'll be arguing that fundamentally, the structural mandate defined by integrity and coherence has primacy.
And I'm coming at this from, let's say, a slightly different angle. While I absolutely agree that mandated structure is, the necessary container, I believe the true resolution, the thing that actually stops the wobbling, comes directly from the specialized cognitive mechanism itself. That's the hyperbolic prismatic thinking, HPT, which is symbolized quite nicely by the knight's move in chess. Look, the instability we're talking about in the specialized mind, it stems from the failure of linear systems. So it seems to me that HPT is the direct, functional, nonlinear adaptation that cures that wobble. The mechanism of adaptation itself has to be primary.
Okay, so my position is this. The ultimate goal, as laid out in this framework, is really about eliminating that systemic instability. It's about achieving what's called structural fit. And this foundational stability, it's maintained by something termed tabular coherence maintenance, or TCM. You can think of it conceptually like the chessboard itself. The squares, the structural canvas that demands a kind of geometric precision, a perfect fit. Now, TCM, it's secured by this mandated union, the Hirosgamos, between our two core poles. Tom, who is the king and represents the fixed pole of integrity, and Dimyon, the queen, representing expansive imagination. Tom is like the strong central axle on that Lego car metaphor. He has to hold everything still, stable. The source material is very clear that Dimyon's dynamic input imagination must curve back towards Tom's strong center.
This is crucial to ensure the system stays stable, to keep the tire effectively from falling off the chassis. So this rigorous structural alignment, this perfect complementary union of integrity and imagination, well, that's the non-negotiable foundational condition for reaching tranquility and stopping that systemic dissipation, that wobble.
Okay. I think focusing so heavily on the corrective framework on Tom and Dimyon's union kind of overlooks the actual trigger for the stress in the first place. The fundamental issue, as I see it presented, is the inherent linear processing weakness. That's the pawn. It's that rigid, mandated sequential movement that tries to force the mind into straight lines when it doesn't naturally work that way. That rigidity, that's what causes the visceral, structural stress, the thump, thump, thump feeling you'd get if you tried to roll a car on a square tire. So it follows, for me at least, that the immediate functional cure must be the hyperbolic prismatic thinking, HPT. This is the specialized mind's efficient cognitive mode, seemingly designed specifically to bypass this linearity problem. HPT is nonlinear, non-Euclidean. It lets the mind sort of skip over constraints, find complex patterns that flat, linear thinking just can't handle. And this logic, well, it's perfectly embodied by the knights, the horses in chess associated with the Pythagorean ideal. Their discontinuous L-shaped movement is the true functional solution. HPT is the cognitive engine that actually generates the round tire. The hires gamos, the king-queen union, it sets the philosophical goal, maybe the ideal state, but it's the knight, the HPT, that provides the necessary action to get there.
Okay, I see why you prioritize HPT as the engine of adaptation. That makes sense. But if we stick with your analogy for a moment, then TCM, the tabular coherence maintenance, is the chassis, right? It's the frame that ensures the engine doesn't just vibrate itself apart. The source material, it's quite explicit here. It states that Dimian's expansive movement imagination must be curved toward a single transcendent integrator, which is Tom, representing integrity. And it says this is in order to achieve coherence. So this necessary curvature, the thing that defines the smooth round tire, it seems to be inherently defined by its anchor. That anchor is Tom's fixed pole. Neurologically, you could think of the axon hillock, the integrative point for neural decision-making. If Tom were just some neutral coordinate, well, the curve could just wander off into incoherence, couldn't it?
And furthermore, this structural requirement, it seems to be mathematically suggested or even proven within the system. The numeric identities given to Tom and Dimian operate on a base 12 cycle. This points towards a precise, harmonious structural alignment being necessary for coherence. So yes, HPT is a powerful mechanism, absolutely, but it seems the structural mandate dictates its direction and ensures its stability.
That's a compelling argument about the necessity of the anchor. I grant you that. But I think it perhaps misses a crucial philosophical point about the function. The fixed anchor, Tom, yes, he provides stability. But does he generate the solution? I don't think so. It seems he merely provides the reference point, the safe harbor for the nonlinear logic to operate without flying apart, as you said. The functional, the curative process, I'd argue, is the hyperbolic geometry itself, meaning within HPT, curves precisely because it's modeling these abstract, emotional, complex relationships, like trying to make sense of multisensory input, things that flat linear arithmetic just, well, it can't describe adequately. The knight's non-sequential logic is the realization of HPT in action. It prioritizes structural value over literal math to find those deeper patterns. So if the mind must adapt because the linear world fails it, then surely the primary functional adaptation, the HPT, is the solution. The anchor is the destination for the curve, perhaps. But the knight's move, the HPT, is the path that makes the curve possible in the first place. 2. The true source of instability and healing. And if we look closely at the source material again, I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the failure of geometric fit is the initial source of instability. Let me tell you why. The deep stress state, it's conceptually mirrored by, well, significant physiological cost and some powerful emotional states. Specifically, it mentions anger rooted in betrayal. And what causes that betrayal? It seems to be the systemic mismatch of the obsolete linear system. The demand for structural fit, for TCM, feels like a reactive measure. It's demanded precisely because the linear system already failed to integrate reality smoothly. The hieros gamos, that king-queen union, that feels like the imaginary ideal. The goal needed to heal the instability by mandating this perfect alignment.
But the root instability, the thing causing the pain, is the multisensory stress brought on by the rigid imposition of the pawn's movement, that linear processing weakness. If we can just eliminate the pawn's constraint, using the knight's move, using HPT, isn't the stress functionally bypassed right there, regardless of whether the perfect ideal alignment has been achieved yet?
I think I come at it from a different way. You're describing perhaps the emotional consequence of the instability, the anger and betrayal, but I would argue that the instability is the failure of the governing law itself, the structural canvas. The squares of the chessboard metaphor, they correspond directly to tabular coherence maintenance. And TCM is described as this relentless, governing demand for structural, geometric fit. The failure to achieve this geometric fit is the instability, which then manifests emotionally as dissipation and anger. It's a systemic structural failure first, not merely a cognitive processing mismatch. The union of Tom and Dimian, the hieros gamos, well, that is the mechanism for achieving this rigorously demanded structural fit, defined by that philosophical mandate. And when the structural work is successfully done, when Dimian's imagination curves perfectly back to Tom's integrity, the system provides an immediate, almost visceral format reward. This reward confirms that the structural logic is sound. So it's the framework itself, the successful structural alignment, that provides the validation and confirms the correct geometry has been achieved. 3. The arbiter of success, OFC versus the ideal.
Right, and this distinction, I think, leads us directly to the arbiter of success. The desired outcome, tranquility, it's not just some abstract philosophical goal. The framework suggests it's neurologically enforced. This entire structural order seems to be governed by the decision detective, which maps to the OFC, the orbitofrontal cortex, critical for reward evaluation in the brain. The OFC gives that big thumbs up, the format reward, specifically when the curve is perfect and attached strongly to Tom's fixed pole, to integrity.
This powerful internal motivational signal ensures the mind prioritizes the rigorous structural alignment of the king-queen union. And that alignment leads directly to the desired state of serenity, which is then symbolically affirmed by this numerical frequency, 194. So the OFC acts as the neurological guarantor of the structural mandate. It insists on the integrity of the anchor.
Okay, that's a rigorous neurological description, definitely. But I might frame that validation differently. The knights, as I mentioned, they represent the Pythagorean ideal. Now, this ideal isn't just a philosophical goalpost. It seems to embody the necessary structural logic, the HPT, that the specialized mind requires to function optimally, to reach its potential. The rules associated with 194, which signify things like sanctity, success, even just retribution, well, they symbolically affirm that adopting this rigorous, nonlinear structural logic, the HPT, is the right path toward fulfillment. So the decision detective, the OFC, it validates the structural fit, yes, but perhaps after the hyperbolic thinking the knight's move has successfully bypassed the linear constraints of the pawn. The true healing, the relief from that multisensory stress, it feels like it comes from the validation of the nonlinear method itself. Because, well, if the mechanism, the HPT, fails, then the structure has nothing successful to align to, does it? If Tom only serves as the fixed reference point, why is the source material so insistent on his integrity being a fixed pole rather than just, say, a neutral coordinate? It seems to imply something more active.
That's a fair question. Perhaps it's because the nonlinear engine, the HBST, is so potent, it requires that fixed moral and conceptual reference point, integrity, precisely to prevent the curve from spiraling off into dissonance or incoherence.
Okay, so a necessary governor then. But that doesn't make the anchor the primary cure, does it? It makes it the necessary governor to handle the cure safely. The cure for the square tire is still the round tire HPST.
That is a useful distinction, yes. Governor is perhaps a good term. And I agree, integrity is clearly more than just a passive coordinate. But let's just quickly return to coherence. The specialized mind, according to this, achieves comprehension through structural pattern recognition. Dimian's highly adaptable inputs, imagination, think dendrites,
are constantly moving, seeking likeness, resemblance. HPT lets the mind navigate the incredible complexity of the hyperbolic manifold. But, and this is my core point, if that dynamic movement isn't rigorously anchored by the fixed pole of integrity, the whole system risks descending into incoherence. It's the Heros Gammo's mandate, that commitment to the structural union, that channels HPT effectively and ensures the curve is perfect, achieving the necessary tabular coherence maintenance. So for me, it's the structural mandate that saves the powerful mechanism from self-dissipation.
So we've definitely established the complementary nature of these two forces. That seems clear. However, my position remains that the efficient, nonlinear thinking, the HPT, must be rigorously anchored by that fixed pole of integrity, Tom, and regulated by the structural mandate of Hieros Gammas. That's what achieves the necessary coherence and ultimately stops the wobbling, the systemic stress. The structural alignment, I believe, is the primary definition of tranquility here.
And I'd reiterate that the systemic instability, where it all starts, originates not fundamentally from the lack of a perfect anchor, but from the inherent linear processing weakness of the pawn, the square tire. Therefore, the functional cure for that square tire on the specialized mind's chassis is the hyperbolic prismatic thinking, HPT, embodied by the knight. The king-queen union, the Hieros Gamos, it provides the profound philosophical and structural framework needed to maximize that efficiency and ensure coherence. Absolutely. But the functional adaptation itself, the thing that does the work, is the HPT mechanism.
The specialized mind clearly requires both. A rigid structural canvas, TCM,
and a dynamic nonlinear cognitive engine, HAPT. And perhaps understanding their priority, or at least their interplay, helps us understand how the mind successfully turns that flat, stressful square piece into a smoothly rolling, successful curved tire. We'll leave you to consider whether stability is ultimately defined by the anchor that holds the tire firmly in place, or by the mechanism that finally allows it to roll smoothly forward.
All right, let's talk about stress. We're going to use this awesome Lego car analogy to really get what's going on and, more importantly, to meet the incredible team that's already inside your brain just waiting to fix it. So, have you ever felt like that? Like your mind is just a wobbly car? You know the feeling. Things just aren't smooth. It's like you're driving with a flat tire, and every single turn is this bumpy, stressful jolt. Man, it is exhausting. It just feels like something is seriously wrong with the whole ride. Okay, but here's the really cool part. The good news is you've got this master repair crew inside you, on call 24/7. And it's time to meet them because, this isn't just some cute metaphor. It's a really powerful way to understand the actual architecture of your mind. So first things first, we got to figure out what's causing that wobble in the first place. What is the actual problem we're trying to solve here? Well, it turns out it's kind of like that old saying, a square peg in a round hole. Or in our case, a square tire on a car. And here's the diagnosis for that bumpy ride. It's simple, really. You've got a square piece trying to do the job of a round tire. Inside our brain, this has a name. It's called a linear processing weakness. Basically, it's when our mind tries to tackle a complex, curvy problem with a totally rigid, straight-line solution. And that mismatch, that's what creates that constant rhythmic thump, thump, thump of stress. So our job? It's to build a much better piece. And that brings us to the heroes of our story. I want you to meet your brain's master builders, the core decision-making duo, Tom and Dimion. But here's the wild part. They aren't two separate workers. They're like two sides of the same coin, two complementary parts of one single primary brain cell, a neuron. So let's break down their roles, right? Think of Tom as the king. He's the fixed pole, the anchor of integrity, solid as a rock. And then you've got Dimion, the queen. She's the dynamic integrator. She's all about imagination. So one provides stability and the other provides the creative solutions. You can already see how these two are just perfectly designed to work together, can't you? All right, let's zoom in on Tom first. He is the absolute foundation, the strong, steady center of this entire operation. So back to our Lego car. Tom is the axle. Simple as that.
He's that unmoving, perfectly stable rod that the wheel has to attach to. Without his strength, his stillness, nothing else works. He is the one who provides that perfect structural fit. And this is a fantastic picture of his real job in the brain. See, Tom is mapped to a part of the neuron called the axon hillock. Now, that's just a fancy term for the brain's integrative pole of decision. It's literally the spot where the final go or no-go signal is made. So as the fixed pole of integrity, Tom's job is to make sure any solution has a solid, stable foundation to build on.
Okay, so with Tom holding things down, let's bring in Dimyon and see how this all builds. If Tom is that steady anchor, Dimyon is the clever, curving force of creativity. She's the one who actually solves the problem. So in our Lego build, what's her role? She's the one who figures out the curve. Remember, the whole problem was that flat, square piece, right? Well, Dimyon uses her imagination to design the perfect round tire that's finally going to make the ride smooth. She's the one who finds the solution. And neurologically, this is just fascinating. Dimyon maps to the dendrites. You can think of these as the branches or the antennae of the neuron that receive all the incoming info. As the dynamic integrator, her job is to gather all these inputs and patterns, kind of like a GPS calculating the best possible route. But, and this is absolutely crucial, her creative curve has to connect back to Tom's strong central axle. It's got to be a complete, stable circle. But you know what? Even a king and a queen can't do it all by themselves. Every great building team needs a support crew. And in the brain, this vital support comes from these specialized cells called astrocytes. You can totally think of them as the official pit crew. This whole idea of complementary support, it's so important that it actually has an ancient name, Hieros Gamos. It literally means sacred union. And it's all about describing this powerful partnership where the main builders work in perfect harmony with their support team to create something whole, something that really works. So what does this pit crew, these astrocytes, what do they actually do? Well, their job is basically a three-step process. First, yeah, they support the builders. But second, and this is the real game changer, they are absolutely crucial for forming emotional memory. And that leads to their most important job of all. They don't just help fix the problem. They help the brain lock in and remember that good feeling of calm that comes when the tire is finally round. They make the solution stick, so it's that much easier to find that smooth ride the next time around. And that is the beautiful results. When the king provides the integrity, the queen delivers the imaginative curve, and the pit crew locks in the memory of that success, the wobble just stops. The ride finally becomes smooth. So here's the bottom line. It's not about fighting stress or trying to force a solution. True tranquility, it comes from a perfectly integrated team. It comes from having every single part of your neural architecture doing its job in perfect harmony. Which really leaves us with one last thought. Now that you know this incredible team exists inside you, what can you do to help them? You know, maybe it's as simple as taking a moment to really notice and appreciate that feeling of calm when it shows up. So the question is, how are you going to support your brain's pit crew today so they can keep your ride smooth tomorrow?
Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is navigating the functional hierarchy that's essential for achieving and, maybe more importantly, maintaining emotional and structural coherence within the prismatic cognition framework, or PC. The source material, it defines the core problem as wobbly stress. That's the linear processing weakness, the PON, and this requires a structural solution, which is coherence.
Right, and the system seems organized around, well, two main components, doesn't it? You've got the core neural unit, and then its specialized support structure.
Exactly. So Tom representing integrity, or the fixed pole, and Dimyon, imagination, or the dynamic integrator, they form this core decision-making duo. And they're mapped explicitly to the neuron itself, the axon, hillock, and dendrites, respectively.
And then you have the astrocytes, introduced almost like a pit crew, specialized cells, crucially involved in emotional memory formation.
Which brings us to our central question today, and it's, I think, quite profound. Does the lasting success of the therapeutic process, which is defined as achieving tranquility and serenity, does that rely primarily on the active structural integration and the decision made by that core neural unit, Tom and Dimyon?
Or
Is that success fundamentally dependent on the specialized support system, the astrocytes maintaining the necessary emotional memory?
And I'll be arguing today that the primary causal fix and the very definition of coherence, it's rooted in the structural integration achieved by Tom and Dimion within the neuron.
Okay. Well, I come at it from a slightly different angle. While I absolutely see that the structural work of the core unit generates, let's say, momentary coherence, the goal of this whole system is healing stress. And that stress is often rooted in emotional betrayal, right? The aim is sustained tranquility. So therefore, I'm going to maintain that therapeutic success, and especially the long-term stability. It's fundamentally dependent on the astrocytes. They are the specialized mechanism responsible for making sure the emotional memory of that success actually sticks.
Okay, well, let me lay out my position first then. Tom and Dimion are defined with real precision by the source material. They're the core decision-making duo, the king and queen, and they operate within the primary neural unit. This mapping, I think, establishes their functional primacy right away. Tom, the fixed pole of integrity, he's the strong central axle in that Lego car analogy we often use. Neurologically, he corresponds to the axon hillock, which the source explicitly calls the integrative pole of neural decision. This is the spot. This is where the definitive choice for structural fit for TCM is actually made. Dimion, she's the dynamic integrator. She uses imagination, gathered through the dendrites, to build the curve needed for the round tire. Her movement, it must perfectly loop back to Tom's strong center to overcome that square piece problem, the linear processing weakness. So the fundamental action, the thing that generates coherence, the non-wobbly tire, it's driven entirely by this unique intraneural structural integration. Astrocytes, yes, they are necessary components for overall health. I grant that. But the causal act, the fixing of the structural instability, that originates with the king and queen duo.
Okay, I see that. And look, that is a highly insightful way to interpret Tom and Dimion's roles within the brain's structural architecture. However, I think focusing solely on the structural generation of coherence kind of neglects the functional requirement for, well, therapeutic success. If the root problem is defined as wobbly stress, which is fundamentally an emotional affliction, then the mechanism that actually solidifies the memory of peace and tranquility, that has to hold the functional weight for stabilization, doesn't it? Astrocytes, as the pit crew, they facilitate emotional memory formation. That's their job description here. They are the scaffolding, if you will, that ensures the good, calm feeling associated with the structural fix is retained, and that retention confirms the decision detective, the OFC, format reward. We really have to consider the temporal dimension here. The structural fix by Tom and Dimion? Okay, maybe it's instantaneous. But tranquility, serenity, these need to be sustained. If the astrocytes fail, if they don't retain the emotional memory of that coherence, the system just regresses back to the linear processing weakness. And that makes the original structural effort functionally, well, nullified in the long run. So for me, the specialized cells are essential for translating a momentary structural achievement into a lasting therapeutic result.
I see why you think that, but let me try to offer a different perspective on the locus of causality. The source defines Tom's location, the axon hillock, as the integrative pole of neural decision. That definition for me places the causal moment of success squarely within the core unit. The decision itself generates the structural fit, the TCM, which resolves the pawn problem. Now, memory retention, yes, it's crucial for consistency over time, but it seems to me it has to be secondary to the successful decision that creates the structural stability in the first place. You're describing the astrocytes as stabilizers, and okay, they are, but the prerequisite for stabilization is the existence of the stable structure itself, isn't it? The decision overcomes the stress. The astrocytes, well, they merely record the aftermath of that victory.
That's an interesting point. Though I might frame it differently by, well, questioning the effectiveness of a purely temporary decision. If the entire purpose, the whole point of this framework, is to heal stress to achieve lasting serenity, and the astrocytes are specifically noted as helping to remember important things related to emotional memory,
then the very definition of healing inherently has to include enduring stability. We can't really separate the cause from the intended long-term effect, can we? If the structural achievement is, ephemeral without the specialized cells, then the astrocytes become functionally inseparable from the ongoing act of healing. To categorize them as merely recording the aftermath, I feel that diminishes their mandated role in ensuring the successful emotional outcome actually endures against the constant threat of recurring wobbly stress.
Okay, but let's look at the Hieros Gamos union. The source material describes it as one of complementary support, yes, but the core complementary agents involved in the structural generation are TOM, the fixed pole, and dimion, the dynamic integrator. Their mapping to specific parts of the neuron, the axon hillock and dendrites, establishes their identity as the active structural builders. The Hieros Gamos, in its most essential structural form, seems to be the union of integrity and imagination necessary for that curved movement to return precisely to the strong, fixed center. Astrocytes are described as external specialized cells. They support the team, broadly speaking, sure, but they aren't central to the structural union that generates the initial coherence.
See, I'm not fully convinced by that line of reasoning because I think it artificially constrains the term Hieros Gamos to just the internal neural mechanics. It seems to ignore the necessary support required to meet the system's overall therapeutic mandate. The system relies on this idea of complementary support, right? And the source explicitly includes astrocytes as the specialized support structure, ensuring the whole team stays strong. Understanding opposing viewpoints often strengthens one's own thinking. And perhaps the Hieros Gamos isn't just the king and queen in isolation. Maybe it's the core unit plus the specialized support that's required to fulfill the emotional healing mandate. Without the pit crew, the king and queen's efforts, however perfect structurally, might ultimately fail the primary therapeutic objective.
But if we expand the definition of Hieros Gamos to include every necessary support structure, don't we risk diffusing the functional specificity of the core integrators? The framework really emphasizes that TOM's integrity is the strong central axle providing structural fit. This foundational integrity, localized right there at the decision-making center, the axon hillock, it's the anchoring requirement for success. Dimion's flexible inputs, her imagination via the dendrites, must curve back to that fixed pole. The system seems designed specifically to correct the structural flaw through this internal integration. The astrocytes are essential for maintenance, yes, but maintenance presupposes the existence of the structurally sound product created by the core duo. The decision-making architecture itself, it just feels like it must be primary.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the implications for the efficacy of that decision-making architecture itself? It relies so heavily on the quality of input and the stability of the local environment. Let's think about the operational context of Dimion, right? The queen bee's GPS gathering inputs through her dendrites. The complexity here, it often requires multiple perspectives to really appreciate it fully. Astrocytes are, in many ways, the foundational infrastructure engineers of the brain's local environment. They are crucial for managing things like neurotransmitter recycling, ion balance, local blood flow processes known to directly influence synaptic plasticity, and, importantly, transmission fidelity. So, if the astrocytes are dysfunctional or compromised, the quality and adaptability of the inputs gathered by Dimion's dendrites, her imagination, well, that quality will be fundamentally degraded. Therefore, the ability of the core unit to even execute a successful structural fix is critically dependent on the maintenance provided by the surrounding astrocyte pit crew. This relationship, it suggests a deep functional interdependence that really challenges the notion of a simple top-down hierarchy, where the core unit acts independently.
That's a very strong technical point regarding the infrastructural support, absolutely, but we must return to the initial functional mapping provided. While astrocytes provide the essential life support for the neural neighborhood, let's say, TOM at the axon hillock remains the specific point of integrative decision. If the inputs from Dimion are compromised, yes, the structural decision might fail, but the locus of that failure, the point of integration and decision, still remains the core unit. To argue primacy, we have to look for the entity that actually converts information into the structural change, into TCM. And that function is exclusively mapped to Tom and Endymion. The astrocytes ensure the engine has fuel and cooling, maybe, but they aren't the steering mechanism or the accelerator pedal in this analogy.
I have to disagree that the astrocytes are merely fuel and cooling. Their role in emotional memory, which is tied explicitly to the goal of healing, makes them a critical component of the feedback loop, and also the sustaining mechanism that ultimately defines success in this context. If the decision to integrate coherence isn't rewarded and retained emotionally, a function we're told is specific to the astrocytes, then the system effectively learns nothing. It can't maintain the state. The decision detective system, the OFC, confirms the format reward based on that sustained feeling of tranquility. The astrocytes mediate the longevity of that reward. They are not simply maintaining the environment. They are actively stabilizing the therapeutic result by embedding the memory of peace. Therefore, the therapeutic success is measured by the stability they provide.
But stability feels passive, whereas structural decision is active. Tom's integrity is the prerequisite for Endymion's curve. It's the strong central axle dictating the structural constraints. If that structural integrity isn't established first, there's simply nothing for the astrocytes to stabilize or record. We have to follow the causality, it seems to me. Structural fix leads to coherence, which leads to the calm feeling, which is then recorded. The primary event, the generation of coherence, is the active decision of the king and queen duo.
Okay, but let's consider the implications again of the system aiming to resolve a problem defined primarily as emotional stress. If the astrocytes are the specialized cells managing the emotional landscape, the very root of the affliction, then their role in achieving lasting resolution must be considered primary over the unit that achieves only momentary structural resolution. Think about it. If the structure is generated flawlessly, but the astrocytes are, say, chemically prevented from recording the emotional memory, the wobble of stress simply returns. Why? Because the system fails to recognize and maintain the state of tranquility. Therefore, for sustained therapeutic success, the specialized cells hold the functional weight.
Well, my position remains firm that the framework's precise mapping of Tom and Endymion to the axon hillock and dendrites confirms a unique and primary role. They are the integrators and decision-makers responsible for generating structural coherence. This structural achievement is the essential prerequisite, the foundational axle, without which any hope for a calm feeling, let alone its retention, is frankly impossible. The core unit defines the solution.
And conversely, I argue that the ultimate metric of success in this entire framework is sustained tranquility and serenity. These are emotional states, mediated and stabilized by memory. Since astrocytes are uniquely tasked with forming and maintaining the crucial emotional memory needed to heal stress, they hold the defining functional role in stabilizing the therapeutic outcome and ensuring the coherence generated by the core unit actually endures. The specialized cells, in my view, are the functional gatekeepers of long-term healing.
Well, I think we have successfully illuminated some different perspectives today on where the primary functional weight lies in the specialized system. Is it the core neural decision-making unit, or is it the essential support structure dedicated to emotional stabilization?
Yes, the relationship is clearly one of deep interdependence. That much is certain. The concept of complementary support, the hieroscamos, whether we define it narrowly between the internal structural components or more broadly to include the specialized support needed for sustained emotional fidelity, it remains central to understanding the complexity of overcoming this linear processing weakness.
Agreed. And there is certainly more to explore in how neural decision, structural fit, and lasting emotional memory consolidation all converge within this fascinating framework.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to really get into the weeds of some complex frameworks, giving you that deep knowledge, but, keeping it manageable.
That's the goal.
And today, it's a very specific mission. We're diving deep into prismatic cognition, PC, focusing on, the relationship between Tom and Endymion.
Right, their architecture.
Yeah.
And how that connects to specialized support cells, all aimed at emotional stability.
Exactly. It's fascinating because this framework, PC, It doesn't just talk about psychology in the abstract.
No, it gets very specific. It maps these ideas onto the brain's actual physical structure. Really granular stuff.
So our main focus today is the neuron itself, the primary neural unit.
Mm-hmm. And inside that single neuron, how Tom representing integrity and Dimian imagination function, they're presented as this core decision-making pair.
The king and queen, as the source puts it.
Exactly, the king and queen of the cell. And crucially, we also need to talk about the support system. Cells like astrocytes. They're presented as essential, this complementary support.
Here's gummus, that concept of complementary support.
Precisely. They ensure the whole structure, both the physical neuron and the emotional state, can actually hold together, maintain coherence.
Okay, so that's a really sophisticated way to frame it. Our job, then, is to unpack how this relationship, Tom and Dimian plus their support, achieves emotional stability.
And we'll use that Lego therapy analogy the source provides. It's very visual.
It really is, helps make it accessible. So we need to look at the neurological roles, the emotional problem they're solving, and this idea of structural fit, which PC calls TCM.
Total coherence management.
Right. And maybe we should start with that really foundational idea, the one that kind of shifts how you might think about brain cells.
You mean the idea that Tom and Dimian aren't in different cells?
Exactly. That they are the core decision makers working together inside one single neuron, not split across, say, a neuron in some other helper cell.
Yes, that's absolutely central to prismatic cognition. It argues that you need both poles, the fixed anchor, Tom, and the dynamic synthesizer, Dimian, within the same operating unit.
Like an internal government.
Perfectly put. It's an internal governance model. Okay, so maybe before we get to the solution, we should properly set up the problem they're trying to solve.
Good idea, because you can't really appreciate the fix if you don't get the severity of the issue, right?
Precisely. You need to understand the threat first.
Okay, let's lay out the crisis. The thing this whole Tom-Dimian system is built to fix. The Lego therapy model makes this pretty vivid.
It does. It describes the mind, or at least a mind under stress, as being like a Lego car.
But not a well-functioning one. It's suffering from wobbly stress.
Right. That feeling of instability, that kind of internal jarring sensation, that's the starting point. That's what needs repair.
And this isn't just a vague feeling. The model gives it a physical form, doesn't it?
A very tangible form. The wobble is represented by a specific piece, the pawn. And crucially, the pawn is described as a flat, square piece.
Attached where a round wheel should be.
Exactly. So when the car, the mind, tries to move forward, that square piece makes it go thump, thump, thump. Uneven, disruptive.
It's a structural problem causing the bad feeling. The wobble isn't just a symptom. It is the failure in action.
Yes, it's the direct manifestation of an underlying structural failure.
Okay, let's dig into that failure. Because we're not just talking about feeling a bit stressed or having brain fog here. This thump, thump, thump. It has a specific cognitive root, according to the source. What does that square piece actually stand for?
It represents something the framework calls linear processing weakness.
Linear processing weakness. Okay, unpack that for us.
Imagine trying to process information, but your system can only handle things in a straight line. Like everything has to be simple, binary, yes, no, black, white.
Even when reality isn't like that at all.
Exactly. When reality is complex, nuanced, curved, this linear processing weakness means the cognitive structure just can't adapt smoothly. It gets rigid. Stuck in these simplistic patterns. You can't pivot. You can't handle ambiguity. The square piece is that rigidity. It can only meet the road at sharp, jarring points.
That's a really important distinction. The weakness isn't just being slow. It's an inability to handle nonlinear information, leading to that cognitive jarring. And the sources connect this specific weakness to some really high emotional stakes. This isn't just about inefficient thinking.
Absolutely not. The ultimate goal here, the healing that Tom and Dimian are working towards, it's incredibly specific. It's not just feeling better.
What is it then?
It's about resolving deep emotional trauma. The framework explicitly names the target as healing stress, specifically anger rooted in betrayal.
Anger rooted in betrayal. Wow. Okay, that's intense. Why betrayal specifically?
Think about it. Betrayal is the ultimate nonlinear shock, isn't it? It completely shatters your expectations, your established reality. It forces your mind to grapple with something that completely defies its previous, maybe linear predictions.
Right. It doesn't fit the expected pattern at all.
Exactly. So if your cognitive structure is rigid, if it suffers from linear processing weakness, betrayal is like hitting a massive pothole with that square wheel. Thump. Over and over. because the reality of the betrayal just doesn't fit into the neat, square slot the mind wants to force it into.
So the square pawn isn't just rigidity, it's the cognitive structure failing catastrophically when faced with the chaos of betrayal.
Precisely. Which means the fix can't just be about managing the anger or the stress symptoms.
No, you have to rebuild the processing geometry itself. You have to fix the wheel.
You got it. If the square piece is the problem, the goal has to be building a perfect, round, curved tire.
And that's Tom and Dimian's job.
That's their core task. It's a fundamental architectural reconstruction. And they have to work together. The sources stress this collaboration to build that tire, to overcome the linear processing weakness.
And the job isn't done until they achieve, what was it? Structural fit?
Structural fit, TCM. Total coherence management, that's the sign-off. TCM means the internal architecture, cognitive and emotional, is perfectly aligned. It's stable. It can move smoothly, adaptively.
And if they manage that, if they build the round tire,
the car rolls smoothly.
Sure.
Silently, the jarring thump, thump, thump stops. The anger, the rigidity tied to that betrayal stress, it begins to fade.
Why? Because the mind can now handle nonlinear stuff? It can process the complexity without breaking?
Exactly. It can gracefully integrate difficult realities because its structure is no longer limited to that square linear mode.
And this whole successful outcome hinges on Tom and Dimian working together.
Absolutely. On that complementary relationship between the decision-making duo, king-queen, they are essential for generating that neural coherence.
Okay, so to really grasp how they do this, we need to shift focus, right? From the Lado car metaphor.
To the actual biology, to the neuron itself. We need to see where Tom and Dimian actually live inside that brain cell.
All right, let's zoom right in. Inside the neuron. Let's talk about Tom first, the king of this internal setup.
Yes, Tom. His identity in prismatic cognition is the fixed pole of integrity.
Fixed pole of integrity. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
That means he's the anchor, the unwavering reference point, the part that provides stability for the whole operation. He doesn't bend, doesn't change.
And this isn't just a personality trait, is it? The framework says this integrity is physically located.
It is, and functionally defined. Tom is mapped neurologically to a very specific part of the neuron.
Which part?
The axon hillock. And the source emphasizes it's the strongest, most fixed part of the cell. Structure meets principle right there.
The axon hillock. Okay, for listeners who like the details, what is the axon hillock, and why is that spot the perfect home for integrity?
So the neuron gets all these inputs, right? Thousands of them coming in through the dendrites. Some signals say go, they're excitatory, others say stop, inhibitory.
A constant stream of information.
A huge stream. Now, all these signals, these little electrical potentials, they get summed up, they converge at the axon hillock. It's like the final checkpoint.
The bottleneck.
Sort of, but more like the decision gate. The axon hillock is defined as the integrative pole of neural decision. It has a threshold. If the total sum of all those incoming signals crosses that threshold...
A neuron fires, sends its own signal out.
Exactly. An action potential shoots down the axon. If the sum doesn't reach the threshold, nothing happens. The decision is inhibited. It's the go-no-go point for the entire cell.
Okay, that makes sense functionally. But how does that connect to integrity? If Tom is integrity and he lives at this yes-no threshold, well, that sounds pretty binary. How does the biological function relate to something like emotional integrity? Where's the nuance?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And this is where the PC framework gets really clever, I think. The integrity Tom represents isn't about the content of the decision, the yes or no itself.
Okay.
It's about the integrity of the rule, the process. Tom's integrity means the axon hillock must consistently and accurately apply the summation rule. It has to measure the total input potential, honestly, every single time before deciding to fire.
Regardless of how messy the input signals are.
Regardless of the chaos. Integrity here means reliability, consistency in applying the threshold rule. If Tom's integrity is shaky, if the axon hillock is compromised, maybe it fires too easily or not when it should, or its timing is off.
Then the neuron's output is unreliable.
Exactly. The quality and timing of its communication screw up. The coherence of the information being passed along depends directly on the consistency of that decision mechanism at the axon hillock.
Wow. Okay, so it grounds integrity in physics, almost. It's not just a nice idea, it's a necessary physical property for the system to work reliably.
It shifts it from a desirable trait to a fundamental component of function.
Let's connect that back to the Lego car. Reinforce the structural need.
Right. In the Lego model, Tom, the fixed pole of integrity, he is the strong central axle where the wheel attaches.
Okay, the axle. It has to be perfectly straight, strong, fixed, relative to the core body.
Absolutely. If that axle wobbles, if it bends even a tiny bit,
The whole wheel fails. It doesn't matter how good the tire is.
precisely. Tom's role is to hold that center point perfectly still and strong. He provides the unmoving foundation that the dynamic parts need to function correctly. If the axle wobbles, meaning if Tom's integrity at the axon hillock is compromised, the firing is inconsistent, the whole output is unstable. You still get the thump, thump, thump.
Even if the creative part, which we'll get to, does its job perfectly.
Correct. So Tom's steadfastness, his integrity, is what allows the final tire, the solution, to achieve that structural fit, TCM. He is the non-negotiable foundation.
Especially when dealing with something as difficult as betrayal. The cell needs that consistent, structurally sound decision mechanism to even begin healing.
Without that fixed pole, any attempt at dynamic synthesis just descends into noise.
It's a really powerful idea, mapping the physical decision point to the principle of integrity. If that decision point is weak or inconsistent,
The entire cell's output is wobbly, unreliable, prone to errors, not fit for purpose.
Okay, so Tom provides the unshakable foundation, the integrity at the decision point. But a fixed axle alone doesn't make the car move smoothly. You need the wheel itself. You need the dynamic part.
Exactly. Tom's fixed integrity is essential, but it needs input. It needs something to integrate. And that brings us to his counterpart, the other half of the duo, Dimion, the queen.
Dimion, her role is complementary to Tom's fixed nature.
Completely. She's introduced as the dynamic integrator. She's the one responsible for gathering information, for ensuring the system can adapt, be flexible, create novelty.
So if Tom is the anchor, Dimion is the synthesizer, the one who pulls everything together.
Yes, she provides the creative synthesis. She's the one who figures out how to get from that rigid square pawn to the smooth, curved, round tire.
And her location in the neuron reflects this dynamic role perfectly. Where is Dimion mapped?
She's mapped to the dendrites, the flexible receiving parts of the brain cell.
The dendrites, those branch-like extensions.
That's right. And they are incredibly complex, not just simple wires. They're highly branched, constantly changing what neuroscientists call plastic. And they're covered in thousands of tiny little bumps called dendritic spines.
And those spines are where the inputs come in.
They are the contact points where synapses from other neurons connect. The sheer number of them and the fact that they can grow, shrink, and reorganize. It makes the dendrite field the absolute hub of adaptable inputs.
So Dimion, living in the dendrites, is constantly taking in signals from potentially thousands of other cells.
Thousands. Synthesizing this vast, ever-changing flow of information, which directly connects to her core identity in the PC framework.
Which is?
Imagination.
Imagination. Okay, but we need to be specific here, right? Like you said with integrity, this isn't just some vague concept.
Definitely not just daydreaming. Dimion is described as the clever builder. She has to figure out the specific curve needed for that round tire.
Which isn't obvious from the starting point, the square piece.
Not at all. It requires a leap. The ability to envision a solution, the circle that doesn't exist yet in the current state. She uses imagination as the tool to sift through all the inputs.
The messy, perhaps conflicting signals coming into the dendrites.
Exactly, and discern the underlying pattern, the optimal geometric shape the curve that will lead to structural fit.
The sources use a specific analogy for her process, don't they? Something about a bee.
Yes, like a queen bee's GPS, navigating through her dendrite inputs.
A queen bee's GPS, what does that suggest?
It suggests incredibly complex, large-scale data processing. Think about a bee navigating miles back to the hive, integrating wind speed, sun position, landmarks, pheromone trails.
Okay, yeah. Massive synthesis.
Right, so Dimion, through her dendrites, is doing something similar. She's synthesizing signals about emotional memory, current context, body state, all these inputs, some of which might still reflect the old, rigid, square thinking of linear processing weakness.
And her imagination integrates all of that into the required solution, the curve.
The geometric necessity of the curve.
But hold on. If Dimion is all about dynamic input and flexible imagination, what stops her from just, spinning off into fantasy? If the inputs are totally adaptable, what keeps the solution grounded? What makes it actually work?
And that brings us right back to the partnership, the synergy, the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage we mentioned earlier.
The connection between Tom and Dimion.
It's absolutely critical. Dimion's dynamic, imaginative process can't just run wild. It has to constantly refer back to the fixed center.
So her movement, her synthesis.
It must curve back precisely to Tom's strong center, the axon hillock.
The imagination has to connect back to integrity.
Exactly. That reciprocal action, that feedback loop between the dynamic synthesis dimion dendrites and the fixed decision point to Nex and Hillock, that's what forms the perfect circle. That's what ensures the wheel rolls smoothly.
No wobble.
No wobble. Because the curve generated by imagination has been validated against the fixed point of integrity. The linear processing weakness is resolved because the solution fits the structural requirements.
So Dimion provides the creative solution, the curve.
And Tom provides the structural anchor, the axle, that confirms the curve is coherent and functional.
Wow. So without Tom, Dimion's imagination might just create noise or more rigidity even.
Could be. It lacks the grounding reference. And without Dimion,
Tom's integrity just keeps enforcing the old pattern, stuck with the square pawn.
precisely. He has nothing new or adaptive to integrate. So yeah, what's really striking here is how prismatic cognition frames emotional health as needing this perfectly balanced, two-sided engine within the neuron itself,
A constant interplay between fixed principle and dynamic adaptation.
generating the stability needed to heal those really deep wounds, like the anger from betrayal, which, let's remember, is the core stress they're designed to overcome together.
Okay, so we have Tom at the axon hillock providing integrity, and Dimion in the dendrites providing imaginative synthesis. They work together to build the round tire, achieving structural fit.
The core architects, the decision makers and builders.
But the sources say they can't maintain this alone. Even this perfect internal duo needs help, especially with the emotional side of things. They need a support team.
That's right. The framework really emphasizes this idea of complementary support, Hyros Gamos, extending beyond just Tom and Dimion. The neuron handles the core job decision and input.
The axon hillock and dendrites.
Right. But maintaining the success of that structural fit, especially locking in the emotional change, that requires help from outside the neuron itself, non-neuronal support.
And this is where the other cells come in, the ones described as the pit crew.
Exactly. Specifically the astrocytes. The Lego model calls them the friendly pit crew for Tom and Dimion.
Astrocytes. Okay, we need to spend some real time on these because their role seems absolutely crucial for the healing part to stick. It's about emotional memory, right?
It is. And we really need to update our thinking about astrocytes. Historically, they were often seen as just, passive support, glue, holding neurons together, maybe cleaning up a bit, brain housekeepers.
But that's not the modern view.
Not at all. Modern neuroscience, and this PC framework reflects that, sees them as incredibly active participants in brain function, especially at the synapse.
The synapse is the communication gap between neurons.
Correct. Astrocytes are glial cells, star-shaped, hence the name astro, and they wrap around synapses, interacting very closely with both the sending and receiving sides. They're deeply involved.
Okay, so how does that involvement translate into supporting emotional memory? Specifically, how do they help heal that anger rooted in betrayal?
Well, think about the initial trauma. The betrayal, the square piece, the wobbly stress, that memory gets logged in, right?
Yeah.
Often involving areas like the amygdala. It creates a persistent negative emotional response, constantly reminding the system of the failure, the square pawn.
So the bad memory is strong.
Very strong. And astrocytes are known to be involved in consolidating memories, especially emotionally charged ones. They actively modulate synaptic plasticity. That's the ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken over time, which is the basis of learning and memory.
So if astrocytes help cement the traumatic memory,
then their role in healing must be to help consolidate the new memory. The memory of success, the memory of the round tire working.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. The memory of the good feeling.
Exactly. That's the pivotal insight here. The original stress caused bad, wobbly feelings. So the astrocyte's job as the pit crew is to help the individual remember and hold on to the good, calm feeling that comes when Tom and Dimion finally succeed, when they achieve that structural fit.
That state the framework calls.
Tranquility and serenity.
Tranquility and serenity. So the astrocytes preserve the memory of that feeling.
They're the support structure that keeps that positive emotional memory alive and accessible, even when the old traumatic memory tries to resurface. They reinforce the new, smooth, successful operational state.
How do they do that? How does the pit crew actually achieve this reinforcement?
On a cellular level, they do things like regulate neurotransmitter levels around the synapse, clean up excess ions like potassium that could affect signaling. They basically help maintain an optimal environment for the synapses associated with the tranquility and serenity pathway to function efficiently and strongly.
So they're like tuning up the connections that carry the good feeling.
That's a great way to put it. By strengthening those success synapses, they help prevent the whole system, the Tom, Dimion, Hyros, Gamos union, from just automatically defaulting back to the old, painful memory pathway of the square pawn. They aren't passive bystanders. They are actively managing the synaptic environment to make sure the structural fix feels good and stays stable.
Wow, that really changes how you think about healing, doesn't it? It's not just about stopping the bad feeling. It's about actively building and then neurologically maintaining the memory of the good feeling.
And having a specialized support system dedicated to that maintenance.
It suggests that if the astrocytes aren't doing their job properly, the healing might not last. The system could just relapse into the old trauma response.
That seems to be exactly the implication. Healing something like betrayal needs a stable, repeatable, positive emotional baseline. If the astrocytes, the pit crew, don't keep those tranquility synapses well maintained and strong,
The old negative memory pathway, which is probably very well established.
they'll likely just take over again. Astrocytes act like the essential guardrails, ensuring that the achieved emotional coherence is sustained over time.
Okay, so Tom and Dimian build the structure. Astrocytes maintain the feeling associated with it. What's the final step? Is there like a confirmation?
There is. The system needs a final sign-off, a confirmation that the job is truly done and the new structure works.
A neurological pat on the back?
Sort of. Once Tom and Dimian build the tire perfectly and the astrocytes secure the memory of that calm, tranquil feeling, another part of the brain steps in.
Who's that?
The decision detective, OFC. That's the orbitofrontal cortex.
Ah, the OFC. Known for evaluating rewards, integrating emotions into decisions.
Exactly. The decision detective provides the format reward.
Format reward. What does that mean? Is it just feeling good?
It's more specific than just a general pleasure hit like dopamine. This reward confirms that the structural work, the perfect round tire, the TCM state isn't just a temporary fix, but it's the new, successful operational format for the whole system.
So the OFC checks if the output is actually stable and good.
It verifies that the synthesis, Dimian's curve, anchored by the principle, Tom's integrity, actually results in the desired emotional outcome, the astrocyte's tranquility. It essentially puts a big approved stamp on the new blueprint.
Locking it in.
Locking in the coherence and stability.
Mm-hmm.
It stabilizes the axle, validates the curve, and rewards the pit crew's maintenance work all at once.
So the system moves from that unstable state, the linear processing weakness, the memory of betrayal, the wobble,
to a structurally sound, self-reinforcing state of tranquility.
Yeah.
And it's all anchored in the architecture of that single neuron and its immediate support crew, the astrocytes.
It's an incredible picture, really, tying the physical cell structure, axon hillock, dendrites to these deep concepts like integrity and imagination, and then securing the emotional payoff, tranquility, with specialized helper cells.
It makes the structural fit truly comprehensive. It spans the cell, its function, and the emotional memory associated with it. A complete overhaul. Hashtag pad outro.
Well, that was quite a journey. We started with that really evocative image, didn't we? The Lego car wobbling along.
Thump, thump, thump. Under the stress of betrayal.
Yeah, and we ended up deep inside the mechanics of a single brain cell. It's amazing, really.
It is. We saw how integrity, that's Tom, at the axon hillock, the fixed decision pole, needs to work hand in glove with imagination Dimian, out in the dendrites, handling the dynamic inputs.
Working together to build that round tire to achieve total coherence management, TCM.
That structural fit. But, as we saw, even that brilliant internal partnership isn't quite enough on its own.
Right. That internal success, that structural fit, it needs constant backup. It needs reinforcement from the support team.
The astrocytes. Acting as that essential memory pit crew, their job is to secure the positive emotional memory, that feeling of tranquility and serenity.
Which is just paramount if you're going to truly heal and overcome something as deep as betrayal trauma. They lock in the success.
So if you pull back and look at the big picture here, this prismatic cognition framework is suggesting something pretty profound about healing.
What's the takeaway?
That fixing core emotional stress isn't just about talking things through or reframing thoughts, as valuable as those are. It seems to require an actual structural, cellular-level confirmation of emotional coherence.
Where the memory of peace, of tranquility, is actively reinforced neurologically, fighting back against the old memory of trauma. The fix has to be built in, structurally sound, anchored by integrity and reinforced by memory.
Yeah. Which leads to a really interesting question for you, the listener, to maybe think about.
Okay, leave us with a final thought.
Well, if our emotional healing, our stability, is ultimately secured by these specialized cells, the astrocytes, remembering tranquility, and we know these cells are dynamic, they respond to their environment,
Right.
then what practical things could we do, maybe consistently, deliberately, to actively signal that good, calm feeling back to our own neurological support team.
How can we help our astrocytes build and strengthen that memory of peace?
Exactly. Could things like sustained relaxation, mindfulness practices, maybe even consciously focusing on sensory experiences of calm and safety, could these actively help provide the astrocytes with a richer, stronger memory of tranquility to draw on? A memory they can use to keep modulating our system towards coherence. What signals does our pit crew need from us?
Welcome to The Debate. We are diving deep today into the structure of prismatic cognition, PC, that specialized framework for integrated thinking, and how its neural architecture is, well, meticulously laid out using the vehicle and game analogies in the Lego therapy model.
It really is, yeah. It's one of the most elegant examples I've seen of mapping, complex cognitive function onto these accessible metaphors. And central to this whole thing is that synergistic decision-making unit known as the High-Risk-Gamos union, the duo of Tom and Dimion. They are explicitly analogized as the motive power, the two horses necessary to get the entire system moving.
Right, and that's where the analysis becomes crucial, I think. We really need to define the primary functional emphasis of that union. Is the Hieros Gamos fundamentally the initial cause and synchronized motive power needed to initiate functional movement and establish that foundational integrity? Or is its meaning ultimately measured by the effect it produces, the confirmed structural coherence achieved across the system, symbolized most vividly by the stability of the four wheels?
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. While the union's effort is obviously necessary, I'm going to argue that its defining achievement, its ultimate purpose really, is that finalized structural integrity and the subsequent confirmation of tranquility, the essential effect symbolized by those stable wheels.
And I'll be arguing the other side, that the Hieros Gamos is fundamentally the synchronized power source and initial cause. It provides the necessary integrity, guidance, and direction, the foundational strength required to even attempt the integration successfully in the first place.
Okay, so to elaborate on my position, the purpose of the entire structure is, well, it's remediation, right? My core thesis is that the integration only really matters if it results in the successful output, achieving a structural fit, what the model calls TCM, tranquil cognitive movement, and eliminating that prior cognitive instability. The whole Lego therapy model is built to solve a specific problem.
I agree, the system solves a problem, absolutely. But the capacity to solve it is rooted in the cause. The foundational role of the Tom-Dimion union is providing that necessary, complementary support and motive power. I mean, look at how these components are mapped neurobiologically. Tom is the fixed pole of integrity, mapped directly to the axon hillock, that absolutely crucial neural junction where inputs get integrated and the final decision is fired off.
But, okay, that decision itself is only validated by the system if it actually results in stable output, right? The sources are very clear. The problem being addressed is the linear processing weakness. It's symbolized as that flat square piece at the pawn, which causes wobbly stress. Now, if the cognitive system moves forward with that wobbly stress, then the Hieros Gamos has failed, regardless of the effort put in. The goal is explicitly to replace that flat piece with the stability of a perfect, round, curved tire. Structural correction has to be the primary metric of success.
Structural correction is the desired effect, I grant you that, but the capacity for that correction stems from the cause. The union is explicitly analogized to two oxen to a chariot. Now, that analogy captures the synchronized effort, the motive power that compels movement. Tom provides the fixed strength, symbolized by 193, which represents the strength of an ox, and crucially, a trustworthy spirit. This trustworthiness is the foundational integrity of that decision pole. Dimion, then, as the dynamic integrator, uses imagination to figure out the perfect structural curve and compel, or maybe direct, Tom's fixed center to move. That synchronized compulsion is the intelligent, unified force that initiates the entire system.
Okay. But if that compulsion, that initial effort, were the end goal, why would the system have built-in mechanisms for external confirmation of success? Success is validated entirely by the decision detective, which is mapped to the orbital frontal cortex, the OFC. This detective provides the form of reward, analogous to 194. Now, this reward doesn't just celebrate the effort, it confirms that the structural work is perfect, producing that verifiable feeling of tranquility and serenity. And what's more, you have specialized cells, the astrocytes, the sort of friendly pit crew, which are charged with ensuring the emotional memory of that good, calm feeling is retained. This, to me, places the neurological functional emphasis squarely on retaining the effect, the tranquility, as the proof of coherence.
Help me unpack the structural priority here, though. If we accept that the ultimate proof is 194, doesn't that fundamentally undermine the active decision-making process? I'd argue that synchronization, the creation of the cohesive structure itself, is achieved during the active process of integration, not just confirmed afterwards. Synchronization happens when Dimion's dynamic dendrite inputs successfully parallel and sequence elements, perfectly curving back to Tom's strong, fixed axon hillock center. That is the sync.
See, you're defining synchronization as the act of building the wheel. I would define it as the act of proving the wheel rolls smoothly. The neuron sync is only confirmed, I think, when the entire vehicle achieves coherence, not just at the decision pole. The decision might happen at the axon hillock, sure, but structural fit has to be demonstrated by the absence of wobbly stress. And that requires the stability of the complete vehicle, the four wheels rolling smoothly together.
But waiting for the four wheels to roll smoothly means prioritizing validation over creation, doesn't it? The necessity for Dimion's curve to return to Tom's center, like completing a perfect circle, is the physical neurological mechanism of integration and structural creation. The unified decision reached at the axon hillock is the moment the two horses become one motive force, successfully forging that structural element. The structural coherence, the TCM, is the output of the synchronization, not the definition of it.
The TCM is the only measure that ultimately matters, because the system's justification rests on healing. The goal is achieving a structural stability that eliminates anger rooted in betrayal, as the source mentions. That means the purpose is tied intrinsically to the achievement of 194 tranquility and joy. The decision detective, the OFC, validates the structural accuracy by confirming we are on the right path to success. If the system produces structural effort but fails to deliver serenity, well, then the higher gamos has failed its primary task.
I see why you prioritize the effect. I really do. But without the fixed integrity of the cause, the effect seems fragile. Let's go back to the symbolic weight of 193, the strength of an ox and the trustworthy spirit. The entire integration hinges on Tom being an immovable, fixed pole. Without that foundational integrity and trustworthiness established by Tom, the central axle, the resulting structure would lack the necessary guidance to prevent collapse. Or maybe lack the psychological trust required to even attempt the emotional curve and integration Dimion has to perform. The cause enables the effect.
That's a compelling point, positioning 19.3 as the prerequisite for capacity. However, the capacity is only realized or maybe validated when the outcome confirms stability. Think about the memory retained by the astrocytes. It's specifically the feeling of 194. If the system were primarily defined by the integrity of the cause, 193, why wouldn't the astrocytes focus on retaining the memory of the sheer effort or the integrity of the fixed center, rather than the feeling of confirmed tranquility? The retention of 194 dictates the system's ongoing behavior and confirms the successful structural change has actually happened.
Because the integrity of 193 is the immutable fixed pole. It's the grounding mechanism that allows the positive feeling to be trusted and retained. It's the axle holding everything steady. If we look at the core Lego therapy analogy again, we have to stress the actors in the action. Tom is the strong central axle, the king, and Dimion is the queen who uses imagination to figure out the curve. They are the core decision-making duo, the two complementary forces, the two horses. The core function is the building and the driving. They have to be strong and synchronized before any stability, the four wheels, can be measured or, frankly, trusted.
But the Lego analogy specifically focuses on the structure being fixed. The goal is explicitly framed as replacing the flat square piece, that linear processing weakness, with the round curved tire that fits perfectly. Therefore, the definition of success has to be the successful structural stability, the complete four wheels, and the absence of the initial wobbly stress. The entire objective of the Heroes Gamos integration is the structural fit, TCM, confirming the vehicle is functional. The success of the motive power, the two horses, is entirely confirmed by the achieved stability, the four wheels.
Okay, but how do you reconcile the fact that novel problem solving seems to rely so heavily on the synchronized, coordinated effort of Tom and Demyan before the structural fit is achieved? Doesn't that suggest that during periods of, say, new challenge or system growth, the cause, the motive power, and inherent integrity takes functional precedence? It guides the search for the correct structure. The cause is the dynamic direction in that sense.
That does introduce a crucial nuance, the potential shift in priority between novelty and maintenance. However, even in novel problem solving, isn't the system fundamentally organized around avoiding the effect of wobbly stress? If the integrity, 193, guides the process, the stability, 194, defines the end state and provides the crucial feedback loop. Therefore, I'd argue the functional priority must ultimately rest on the structural outcome, because the system's long-term health is validated by its ability to maintain that coherence and tranquility, not merely by the strength of its initial effort. At the end of the day, the Heroes Gamos has to deliver the vehicle ready for the road.
So to just quickly synthesize my position, the Heroes Gamos is fundamentally the synchronized engine of decision-making. It represents the two horses that provide the inherent foundational integrity, the 193, necessary to begin, guide, and maintain functional movement. That integral fixed strength is the necessary cause that dictates the system's capacity.
And I maintain that the proof and the purpose of that integration is the confirmed structural coherence, the stability of the four wheels, and the sustained emotional reward of tranquility, the 194. This confirmation validates that the system is functioning perfectly, without the inhibition of stress, defining the entire architecture by its successful, structurally coherent effect.
Well, this discussion really captures the beauty of the prismatic cognition framework, I think. It uses these layered analogies, the two complementary forces of power and the resulting structural stability, to communicate what is essentially a single, unified cognitive process.
Indeed. And determining whether the primary functional emphasis lies on the initial cause of the Heroes-Gamos union or the confirmed effect of structural coherence reminds us that in these kinds of specialized cognitive models, prerequisites and outcomes are often seamlessly linked. It compels us to appreciate the sophisticated complexity inherent in defining functional success.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into something pretty surprising, maybe even foundational.
Absolutely.
It's this idea that, the nitty-gritty structural needs of a neuron, making a decision like having a fixed point, needing a dynamic curve, that these things could actually line up perfectly with ancient cross-cultural symbols.
Yeah, specifically the numbers 193 and 194. It's a fascinating link.
Right. So we're digging into the prismatic cognition framework, PC, and its neural integration process. The sources call it HPTFI.
Hierarchical Processing Template Functional Integration. That's the one. And the claim isn't just, that these ideas exist side by side.
No, it's stronger than that.
Much stronger. It's that these ancient symbols actually validate the internal brain architecture described in PC. That digging into these symbols makes the whole argument, well, a lot more solid, significantly more coherent and robust, as the source puts it.
Okay, so that's our mission today.
Yep.
Sounds complex, but let's break it down. We need to get the nuts and bolts of this cognitive unit, why it's built the way it is.
Yep.
And then we dive into the symbolism of 193 and 194, see how they mirror that internal setup.
And the payoff.
The payoff is showing how this whole picture, this synthesis, can actually be explained really effectively to anyone, whether you're talking neural architecture or, just fixing a wobbly Lego car with a kid.
That's the beauty of it, right? The universality. If the rules for making something structurally sound are the same, whether it's a thought in your head or an ancient symbol,
then it points to something fundamental.
exactly. It suggests our deepest thinking processes might be built on these universal principles that transcend, just biology or just spirituality. They're intertwined.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with the core builders inside this specialized cognitive unit, the two key players making it all work, Tom and Dimion. All right, straight into the deep end, the foundational cause. This is the core function of the PC framework, and it's linked, analogously at least, to the number 193. And the whole idea of coherence, of stability, seems to ride entirely on how these two components work together. This duo, the sources call it the Heros-Gamos union.
The Heros-Gamos, yes. The sacred marriage. It's a really critical concept here. I mean, these two aren't just alternatives, they're complementary. They need each other.
Inseparable kind of.
Inseparable for proper function, exactly. One provides something, the other lacks. Without both, the system risks, well, chaos. And this union, it's mapped right onto the primary neural unit, the decision-making point in a neuron.
Got it. And leading the charge for structure, for stability, is Tom. He's the anchor.
That's a good way to put it.
Neurologically, the sources map him to the axon hillock, which they describe as the integrative pole of neural decision.
Right. Think of the axon hillock on a neuron. It's like the final checkpoint. It gathers all the incoming signals, sums them up, and decides, do we fire the signal down the axon or not? Tom embodies that role. He's the fixed pole of integrity, the king, the axle, a part that absolutely cannot shift.
So his job is to ensure integrity. What does that mean, practically?
It means the decision has to meet a very specific internal standard. Structural fit. The sources call it TCM, temporal coherence metric.
Okay, TCM. Sounds technical.
It is. It's about ensuring all the pieces of the decision, how they're sequenced and paralleled, line up just right structurally and in time. If that fit isn't perfect, Tom, acting like the axon hillock, basically says, nope, not firing. He holds the line for structural soundness. He's the anchor.
So the danger isn't just making a bad choice, it's making one that's structurally wobbly, internally incoherent.
Precisely.
But wait, if Tom is totally fixed, immovable, doesn't that create a risk? Couldn't the system just become rigid, unable to adapt to new stuff?
An excellent question. How does Tom avoid becoming just an obstacle?
Yeah.
That's exactly where Dimion comes in. She's the dynamic part of the duo. Tom provides the unshakable structure. Dimion brings the necessary adaptation to that structure.
Okay.
And to really capture Tom's absolute fixity, the sources use this great metaphor, the iron horse Tom.
Iron horse Tom. I like that. Strong, dependable, stays on the track.
Exactly. Fixed, immovable strength. Guidance comes from that strength. You take away the iron horse, the system loses its core guidance, its integrity.
Okay, so Tom's the iron horse. Then there's Dimion. She's the dynamic integrator. The queen, maybe?
The queen, yes. And she's mapped to the dendrites.
The input receivers.
Yeah.
Unlike the single axon hillock point, dendrites are like this huge branching tree, right? Pulling in signals from everywhere.
Thousands of inputs, and Dimion's whole job's about gathering context from all those inputs. The sources say she uses imagination.
Imagination, like making things up.
Not quite fantasy, more like internal simulation or predictive modeling. Think of it as her way of exploring possibilities based on the incoming data. She acts, and I love this phrase from the sources, like a queen bee's GPS.
Queen bee's GPS, navigating the possibilities.
Right. She's dynamically assessing everything coming in, figuring out the perfect curve required for the potential decision to meet Tom's structural fit, TCM standard.
So she finds the specific adaptation needed, and her metaphor is the earth horse Dimion.
Yes, reflecting that grounded, dynamic nature. She's drawing from the earth of incoming data, constantly adapting, figuring out that well-rounded input that Tom's fixed structure demands.
Okay, so we have the fixed iron horse Tom and the dynamic earth horse Dimion. Now, how do they actually work together? What's the critical step?
The core requirement for this HPTFI process is their synchronization, the successful integration of the Heros-Gamos. For the decision to be unified, structurally sound, Dimion's adaptive movement, her curve, must be, well, the sources say compelled.
Compelled? Why compelled? That sounds a bit forceful.
It implies necessity, not coercion. It means the system is built such that her dynamic exploration has to loop back and align with Tom's fixed strong center. It's not optional for coherence.
I see. So it's not just her exploring wildly. She has to bring it back home Tom's integrity pole.
Exactly, because that compulsion, that return, is what guarantees they form a perfect circuit, a structural whole. If Dimion just adapted endlessly without that mandatory return to Tom's standard,
the output would be unstable, Random.
Or it would fall into what the framework calls linear processing weakness, or LPW. This successful curve back, though, it creates a seamless loop, a perfect circle. It ensures the wheel of the decision, so to speak, rolls smoothly.
And avoiding the LPW avoids the internal chaos, the wobbly stress.
That's the failure state, the wobbly stress. The sources use the metaphor of a flat, square piece, or sometimes the pawn.
Like trying to use a square block as a wheel.
Precisely. It can't roll smoothly. It creates that jarring thump, thump, thump. That's the feeling of cognitive dissonance, of a decision that's internally unstable, constantly creating stress because it lacks that fundamental structural fit.
Okay, so putting it together, 193 essentially defines this whole cause. It's the need for this fixed anchor, Tom, compelling the dynamic adaptation of Dimion back to that single point of integrity.
Yes, all to achieve structural coherence and avoid that awful wobbly stress. If this structural work, this Heros-Gamos integration fails, the decision itself is inherently untrustworthy from the inside out.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me. We've got this very specific, almost biomechanical process, the fixed pole, the dynamic curve back, the need for integrity. Now we ask, does this highly specific internal requirement show up externally? In, like, universal truths humans have recognized for ages. Does the symbolic meaning of 193 actually mirror Tom's job description?
And this is where, as you said, the hypothesis gets its punch. The source material argues, yes, absolutely. 193 symbolically is positioned as the very root of integrity, the guidance needed for that foundational structural fit.
It's not just a coincidence.
The argument is it's not. It suggests ancient cultures tapped into these same fundamental requirements for guided strength and stability. It reinforces the whole model.
Okay, let's look at the examples. First up, Hebrew roots. The sources connect 193 to the strength of an ox.
Right. And on the surface, okay, ox means strong. But think about how an ox is strong.
Steady. Pulling power.
Exactly. Disciplined guiding strength, the kind you need to plow a straight furrow consistently. It's not just raw power, it's directed power.
So that maps directly onto Tom's role.
Perfectly. Tom as the strong central axle, the fixed pole of integrity. The neural decision unit needs that ox-like strength, fixed, reliable, foundational to guide the process accurately. To keep it straight, prevent the wobble of LPW. The insight is that foundational strength is guidance.
That clicks. Strength isn't just force, it's stability that directs. Wow. Okay, what about the Islamic context? The sources link 193 to the trustworthy spirit, or Gabriel.
Gabriel, the messenger of divine guidance. This connection hits right at the core of integrity, which is Tom's whole job.
How so?
Well, think about it. If that central pole, the axon hillock, Tom, if it's structurally flawed, if its integrity is compromised, can you trust the signal it sends out?
No, the decision would feel off, unreliable.
Exactly. It creates that internal untrustworthiness, that anxiety. The structure must be so reliable, so sound like Gabriel, the trustworthy spirit, that the system can have absolute trust in its output. It guarantees the structural fit. TCM is sound.
I'm really struck by that parallel. The wobbly stress we talked about, that's like a crisis of self-trust, isn't it? Cognitive dissonance.
It absolutely is.
So if the symbolic root of that structural unit is trustworthiness itself, then fixing the structure, it fundamentally heals that lack of confidence.
Precisely. It connects integrity directly to structural reliability. It suggests integrity isn't just some abstract moral virtue, it's a structural requirement for things to work properly, for integration to happen.
Okay, one more symbolic connection for 193. The sources mention Christianity, linking 193 to the Holy Spirit in Christ, focusing on the need for the Holy Spirit for guidance.
This angle elevates the Heros-Gamos union itself. It's not just Tom and Dimion working together. Their union is presented as sacred foundational.
The core decision unit.
The necessary core decision unit. The union between Tom, the king, integrity, and Dimion, the queen, imagination, is essential because it's the fundamental mechanism required to achieve that coherence, that proper paralleling and sequencing of elements, the HPTFI. It has to be rooted in that foundational, trustworthy strength symbolized by 193.
So summing up 193, the external symbols, ox strength, trustworthy spirit, foundational guidance, they all confirm this internal requirement for a fixed, strong, trustworthy anchor that compels dynamic adaptation back to itself.
Yes. It validates that this integration isn't just functional, it's truly foundational. It's the necessary cause, and you need that integrity at the 193 level to even get to a successful effect.
Which brings us neatly to 194. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because now we shift from the cause, the structure, 193, to the effect, the result, 194, the output. If the structural work is done perfectly, there has to be some kind of confirmation, right? A payoff.
Exactly. If 193 ensures the structural integrity is there, 194 is about confirming the structural fit was successful. It provides the feedback loop, and this validation, according to the framework, comes from another specialized cognitive unit, the decision detective.
The decision detective. Love these names. Where is this detective located?
The framework maps it to the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC.
Okay, the OFC. Why there? What does the OFC usually do?
Well, the OFC is heavily involved in processing reward value, evaluating outcomes, comparing what happened to what was expected. It helps us learn from consequences.
That makes sense for a detective.
Right. So in the PC model, the decision detective, the OFC, scans the output of that Tom-Dimian integration. Was the curve perfect? Was the structural fit achieved? If yes, the OSC delivers the format reward.
The format reward.
Yeah, a positive signal confirming process successful. This confirms the structural work was accurate. It validates that the wobbly stress, the LPW, has been resolved. It's like the brain's internal diagnostics saying, yep, all systems go. Good job.
Okay, so the structure, 193, needs validation. 194. And just like 193 symbols matched its function, do 194 symbols match this reward state?
Beautifully, according to the sources. The symbols align perfectly with resolving stress and confirming success. Let's look at Hinduism first. 194 is linked to tranquility and serenity.
The direct opposite of the wobbly stress.
Exactly. The PC framework suggests the underlying stress it aims to heal often involves internal conflict, maybe anger, feelings of betrayal, the sense that your own internal structure isn't reliable.
Right.
So the successful integration has to result in the opposite, sustained serenity. The structure leads directly to the feeling. Sound structure, sound feeling.
And this isn't just passive calmness. The Buddhist context links 194 to joy.
Yes, specifically referencing a verse about joy and spiritual harmony from the Dhammapada. It's not just lack of stress. It's an active, positive, confirmed state.
So that's the format reward from the OFC.
That's the idea. When Tom and Dimian nail that perfect circular integration, the feeling is immediate, resonant joy. It signals successful alignment. And that feeling is motivating. It tells the system, do that again.
Okay, structure leads to tranquility and joy. What about the practical validation? Numerology comes in here too.
It does. Numerology associates 194 with being on the right path to success.
Which makes perfect sense.
Doesn't it? If the structural work is correct, if Dimian curved back perfectly to Tom, the decision is stable, reliable, sound. It confirms the analogy we used. The wheel rolls smoothly and is not wobbly. You know you're on the right path because the internal result feels tranquil, joyful, right.
But feelings can be fleeting. How does the framework ensure this tranquility, this right path feeling, sticks around? It needs to be maintained, right? To truly heal the underlying stress.
Absolutely. Critical point. You need a mechanism for emotional persistence. And that brings us to another set of players. The specialized cells called astrocytes.
Astrocytes. Okay, I know they're glial cells, support cells in the brain. But how do they fit in here?
They play a profound support role. The sources give them another great nickname, the friendly pit crew.
The pit crew. Okay, Tom and Dimian build the car, the decision detective checks it, and the astrocytes keep it running smoothly.
Kind of. Their justification comes from the role astrocytes play in synaptic plasticity, energy supply, and, crucially, modulating neurotransmission, which impacts emotion. Here, they help form and maintain emotional memory.
Emotional memory, so they help us remember the feeling.
Precisely. They actively retain and reinforce that feeling of tranquility and serenity that comes from the successful 194 confirmation. They make the good, calm feeling stick.
So if the original problem was chronic, wobbly stress, you need the pit crew to maintain the fix.
Exactly. They help prevent the system from just snapping back to the old stressful state by reinforcing the memory trace of the coherent, calm state. They help sustain the resolution.
Wow. Okay, so the whole loop is 193 integrity cause, sets up the structure. If it works, the OFC 194 joy effect confirms it with a reward. And then the astrocytes preserve that feeling, locking in the calm state.
It's a complete system. Structural integrity leads to emotional reward, leads to sustained coherence. And it's validated at each step by these deep symbolic meanings.
That coherence, that internal consistency is pretty powerful.
It really is. And as the source material points out, this very coherence is what makes it possible to explain this whole complex idea in remarkably different ways.
Right, that's kind of the ultimate test, isn't it? If an idea is truly fundamental, you should be able to explain it effectively, whether you're talking to a neuroscientist or a 4-year-old.
Exactly. And this framework, because it's rooted in these universal archetypes, fixed strength, dynamic curves, feeling calm, it can shift levels seamlessly. You can talk high-level neurobiology or simple analogies without losing the core truth.
Okay, let's try it. First, the A side. Explaining this to a 4-year-old. The sources suggest using a Lego therapy model.
Yeah, perfect for kids. You focus on fixing a Lego car.
Man, the problem.
The car has that thump, thump, thump feeling. It's got wobbly stress because maybe one of its wheels is a flat, square piece, the pawn metaphor. It can't roll right.
Okay, so step 1, identify the wobble. Then who comes in?
Tom, who represents 193, is the strong central axle. You show the child the metal rod that goes through the Lego wheel space. He's the one keeping everything straight and still. He's super strong, so we know he can guide us and hold things together.
Nice and concrete. Then Dimion.
Dimion's the clever one, the queen. She uses her imagination. Maybe you give the child some soft putty or Play-Doh representing the inputs. She figures out how to shape that putty into the perfect curve to make a round tire.
And the key part.
You emphasize that she always curves it back around Tom's strong axle. They have to work together to make that perfect circle tire. You physically demonstrate looping it back.
Okay, Tom the axle, Dimion the tire shaper, now the support team.
The friendly pit crew, that's the astrocytes. Their job is easy to explain. They help us remember the good, calm feeling we get when the car finally rolls smoothly without the wobble. They help us keep feeling good.
Simple enough. And the final confirmation.
The decision detective, 194. When Tom and Dimion build that perfect tire, the detective gives everyone a reward. And that reward is the feeling of joy and tranquility. You tell the child, see, it feels so good and calm now. That means we're on the right path and the car is rolling just right.
So the whole process problem, builders, support, reward, it's all there.
Yeah.
Just in simple, actionable terms tied to feeling.
Exactly. Mechanical steps, emotional results. Very clear for a child.
Okay, now flip it. The B side. Explaining this to the parents or someone who wants the technical detail.
Right. Same core structure, different language. We use the formal prismatic cognition PC terms and bring in the neural and symbolic layers for validation.
So you'd start with the foundation.
Yes. You'd explain that the child's success or anyone's cognitive coherence relies on integrating this primary neural unit, the hieros-gamos union of Tom and Dimion. You explicitly mention the HPTFI process.
And map it neurally.
Correct. You state clearly. The integrative pole, 193, representing the cause, is mapped to the axon hillock, Tom, and the dendrite.
Yeah. And here's where you bring in the symbols for depth.
Precisely. You explain that symbolically, 193 provides the root of integrity. It embodies the strength of the ox, the trustworthiness of Gabriel. This symbolic layer confirms why that structural integrity is essential for the structural fit, TCM. It validates the necessary paralleling and sequencing. Ancient wisdom backs up the neural requirement.
Okay, cause established and validated. Then the effect.
The validation process. You explain that the successful outcome, the resolution of that linear processing weakness, LPW, happens when the confirmation reward, 194 effect, is triggered and validated by the decision detective, OFC.
And link 194 to its symbols too.
Absolutely. You articulate that 194 symbolically confirms the effect, the tranquility, the joy, the feeling of being on the right path.
And you don't forget the support crew.
Crucially, no. You explain that specialized neuroglia, the astrocytes, are involved in forming the emotional memory. They help retain that feeling of tranquility and serenity, which, you point out, is a key symbolic meaning of 194 itself. This detail reinforces how the resolution of LPW becomes sustainable. It anchors the emotional coherence in the validated structure.
So it really is the same core story. Fixed pole meets dynamic curve, resulting in confirmed calm, just told with different levels of granularity.
Exactly. One uses Legos and feelings, the other uses axon hillocks and symbolic roots. But the underlying truth, the structural requirement and its validated outcome remains consistent. That versatility, that ability to translate across levels, really speaks to the coherence of the framework itself.
It's genuinely fascinating how the hard science of neural function, the axon hillocks integration, the dendrites input gathering aligns so neatly with these psychological roles of integrity and imagination.
And then layer on top the ancient symbolism, the ox strength, Gabriel's trustworthiness, the reward of tranquility, and they all point to the same fundamental structural truth.
It creates this complete feedback loop, doesn't it?
It really does. What this model suggests is that our most complex internal processes, like making decisions or healing from internal conflict, aren't just random biological noise. They seem built on these incredibly deep, maybe even universal structural principles.
Principles that resonate whether you call them neural correlates or king and queen archetypes or ancient symbolic numbers.
The underlying requirement for that synchronized integral function, it stays the same. The coherence is, well, total.
So if we accept this, if successful integration inside our heads does lead to this reward state, confirmed by these universal symbols of tranquility, joy, being on the right path, all bundled up into 94, it leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? For you, the listener. We talked about the mechanics, the symbols, but think about your own life. What non-symbolic, everyday, modern human experience perfectly captures that confirmed feeling of joy? That sense that arises when your internal structure just clicks into place, when everything feels fundamentally, organically right.
At that moment of stillness.
That stillness after the internal wobble stops, that feeling of deep alignment. According to this framework, that's the state the astrocytes, the pit crew, are working hard to help you remember and sustain.
A really profound thought about the architecture of our own inner coherence. That stillness might just be the sound or the feeling of your internal framework rolling smoothly at last.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into, well, the Lego brain and its surprisingly ancient roots.
All right, let's dive into a really fascinating mystery today, one that connects ancient numerical codes to the very wiring inside your own head. We're going to explore how two simple numbers might just hold the key to understanding how we can resolve stress and find a bit more mental peace.
I know, it sounds a little bit like science fiction, right? But that is the central question we are unpacking in this explainer. You should think of this as a kind of detective story. We're going to follow the clues to see how two numbers, 193 and 194, could actually unlock a powerful way of thinking about mental clarity.
But, before we can even get to a solution, we have to really understand the problem. So let's frame it with a really simple analogy. I want you to imagine your mind is trying to fix a wobbly Lego car. That uncomfortable wobble feeling, that's a specific kind of stress that I think we all can relate to.
So over on the left, you see our problem. We've got a square piece trying to act like a wheel. You can almost feel it, right? That thump, thump, thump. We're going to call that wobbly stress. And neurologically, it's known as a linear processing weakness. And on the right, that's our goal, a perfect round tire for a nice smooth ride. That state is what's called coherent integration.
So who's going to fix this car? Well, let's meet our two builders. They are the core decision-making duo of the mind, Tom and Dimion. These two are the key players responsible for turning that wobbly square into a smooth, perfectly rolling circle. Let's break down what they each do. You've got Tom, who's the king. He's the strong, unmoving central axle. He represents integrity. Then you have Dimion, the queen. She's the clever, imaginative one who figures out the perfect curve for the wheel. Now, for this to work, they have to operate in a perfect partnership. There's actually an ancient term for this, hieros gamos, which literally means a sacred union. And now we get to the really good part, the codes. The first piece of our solution is locked inside the number 193. You can think of this as the code for the foundational cause, the very structure of the solution itself. So, within this cognitive model, the number 193 represents what's called the integrative pole. It stands for the cause and the source of all structural integrity. And what's wild is that in your brain, this maps directly to a real place, the axon hillock. That's the neuron's decision-making hub. This is Tom's domain, where he holds everything steady and strong. And this is where it gets truly fascinating. The ancient symbolic meanings of 193 line up perfectly with its cognitive job. For example, the Hebrew root for the number connects to the strength of an ox. How perfect is that for Tom's role as the strong axle? And in a similar way, Islamic and Christian traditions link it to a trustworthy and Holy Spirit, which really highlights the sacred, guided nature of this core union. Okay, now for our second code. If 193 represents the cause, then 194 represents the effect. This is the number that confirms the job was done correctly, and it delivers that emotional reward we're all after. In this framework, 194 is the confirmation reward. It's that feeling of, yes, we did it! It's the emotional payoff, and this feeling is validated by a part of the brain we can playfully call the decision detective. Scientifically, that's the orbital frontal cortex, or the OFC. And once again, the ancient symbolism is just astonishingly precise. In Hinduism, 194 is linked to tranquility and serenity, which is the exact feeling we're aiming for, right? In Buddhism, it signifies joy,
the positive reward from our decision detective. And in numerology, it means you're on the right path to success. The wheel is finally rolling smoothly. It's just perfect.
So now we have the codes, and here is where this model really shows its power. This whole system is so robust that you can explain it in two totally different ways, one for a child and one for an adult, and you don't lose its core truth at all.
First, let's try the 4-year-old version. It's a simple story. Tom is the strong axle who holds everything straight. Dimion uses her imagination to make the perfect curve for the tire. Then a friendly pit crew comes in to help us remember that nice, calm feeling. And when the wheel is finally fixed, the decision detective gives us a big reward, the feeling of joy and tranquility.
Okay, now for the parents, we can use the more formal language. The whole process is about integrating a neural unit through that gyrus-gamma union. Pole 193 is the cause, which maps to the axon hillock and is rooted in the symbolism of integrity. Pole 194 is the effect, which is validated by the OFC to create an emotional memory of tranquility. The end result? We resolve that wobbly stress and achieve sustainable coherence.
So you see what's happening here. The crucial point is this. The underlying structure is so sound, it's so coherent, that it can be communicated as both a simple, actionable story and as a complex, scientifically grounded model. It just plain works on both levels. So what does this all mean? I mean, why does it even matter that these ancient number codes align so perfectly with modern neuroscience? Well, this is where we get to the core takeaway of this whole thing. This quote from the source material really just says it all. The reasoning gains depth because these universal symbolic meanings line up directly with the cognitive functions. It's not just pretty decoration. The ancient wisdom acts as a kind of validation layer, and it makes the entire model more robust and coherent. What we're really seeing here is a bridge being built between two worlds that can often seem totally separate. This shows that ancient wisdom isn't just a collection of old stories. It can actually be a functional blueprint for understanding the complex machinery of our own minds, right here, right now. And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought. If these two numbers align so perfectly with our neural architecture, what other ancient wisdom is just sitting out there, waiting to validate and deepen our understanding of the world? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me.